Long, long ago, when the stars above Egypt gleamed like diamonds scattered across a blanket of velvet, and the mighty Nile hummed its lullaby to the land, a quiet breeze flowed through the reeds. The water whispered secrets that only the moon could understand, and the sand listened patiently as the stories of kings and gods unfolded under the sky. In this land of ancient wonders, where the sun rose each morning like a golden god and set behind pyramids shaped like mountains, there came a tiny child into the world. He was not born a great ruler, nor did the people know yet that his name would one day be spoken across the world. No, on the night he was born, he was simply a boy, a baby, cradled in the arms of time. His name was Tutankhamun, and though his name meant living image of Aten, it would not be the name he would keep forever. But that part of the story comes later. For now, let us drift gently into his world. The palace where Tutankhamun was born was quiet that evening. The air smelled of warm sand and lotus flowers. His mother hummed a lullaby as soft as the river's ripple, and the guards outside stood still as statues, watching the stars. Within the chambers, flickering oil lamps danced upon the walls, casting gentle shadows of gods carved in stone. The baby cooed softly, and perhaps, just perhaps, a breeze from the open window touched his tiny cheek, as if the wind itself had come to welcome him. This boy was the son of a great and strange king, Akhenaten. Some called him the heretic king, for he had changed Egypt in ways that many did not understand. Akhenaten believed in only one god, the sun itself, Aten, whose golden rays reached down like fingers to touch the earth. He built new temples, closed the old ones, and moved the capital city to a place called Amarna, far from the traditional homes of the gods. But the gods are not easily forgotten. The people of Egypt missed their many deities, the wise Thoth, the powerful Amen, the gentle Isis, and the fierce Sekhmet. They whispered prayers in secret, offered small gifts at hidden altars, and wondered what the future would bring. And as the people watched the sky, the baby prince grew. Tutankhamun's early years were quiet. He played in palace gardens, where butterflies danced among the papyrus, and turtles blinked slowly in the sun. His caretakers sang songs of Ra and Osiris, even if they weren't supposed to. And sometimes they would lift the little prince up high and say, "Look, young one day you will be king." He giggled, not knowing what that meant. But time moves like the Nile, slow and steady, never stopping. And soon, Tutankhamun would face the destiny the gods had woven for him. The years flowed gently, like ripples on the Nile. Tutankhamun grew from a curious child into a thoughtful boy, his eyes wide with wonder at the world around him. The golden deserts whispered ancient tales when the wind passed, and the priests murmured prayers in quiet corners of the palace. Though he was still young, the stars above Egypt had already chosen his path. He was to be king. But oh, he was only a boy, just 9 years old, when the weight of a kingdom came to rest upon his slender shoulders. The royal court was filled with men much older and wiser, dressed in linen robes and carrying scrolls of law. They bowed low before him, but behind their eyes they held questions. Could a child rule Egypt? And yet, it was the will of the Godzor, so the priests said. One quiet morning, before the sun had stretched fully into the sky, the palace began to stir. Gentle bells chimed, doves cooed from their cages. The scent of incense floated through the halls like a dream. It was the day of Tutankhamun's coronation, the day he would become pharaoh. The boy woke slowly, nestled among soft linen pillows. His servant, a kind man named Pharaoh, knelt beside him and whispered, "Wake now, young master. The gods await your crown." Tutankhamun blinked. The idea of being king felt more like a story than something real. He had read about the mighty pharaohs of old Thutmose, Amenhotep, Khufu, their names carved deep into stone. And now his name would be there to etched into history. He was washed in rosewater, wrapped in fine white linen, and adorned with gold. Around his arms, bangles shaped like cobras. Across his chest, a broad collar glimmering with lapis lazuli and turquoise. And upon his head a tall, striped crown, flanked by the rearing cobra of Wadjet, the protector goddess of kings. Outside, the people had gathered. They stood beneath the hot sun, eyes lifted to the palace steps. They did not shout or cheer, no, it was not their way, but their silence was filled with awe. Tutankhamun stepped forward, his small frame wrapped in majesty. Behind him walked two powerful men, I, the wise advisor, with silver in his beard, and General Horemheb, a man of war and discipline. They would help guide the young king, as shadows guide the sun. A priest of Ammon raised his staff. "In the name of the gods," he intoned, "we crown this child as pharaoh of the two lands, Upper and Lower Egypt, keeper of balance, son of the gods." And there, in front of the sacred obelisks and the waiting people, the boy's name was changed. No longer Tutankhamun, the image of Aten. Now, he was Tutankhamun, living image of Ammon, the great god who had been cast aside, but would now be restored. The crowd bowed low. The sky remained still. And in that moment, though his hands trembled and his heart beat fast, the boy became king. That night, as the moon watched over the land, Tutankhamun sat on a golden stool near the open balcony of his chambers. He looked out at the river, thinking about the day's ceremonies, the heavy crown, the many voices, and the silence that followed. "Will the gods speak to me now?" he asked Pharaoh, who was nearby. Pharaoh smiled, folding a soft blanket over the boy's shoulders. "They already do, my king. In the wind, in the water, in your dreams." Tutankhamun yawned, his eyelids heavy. "Then I hope they say nice things." And with that, the boy king drifted to sleep, as the stars above Egypt twinkled like the jewels on his crown. In the cool hush of dawn, when the Nile still shimmered with the reflections of stars, and the temples lay wrapped in the shadows of silence, a change was stirring. Not a loud or sudden change, but the kind that moves quietly, like roots growing beneath the earth, or like morning dew forming on lotus petals. Tutankhamun was king now, and though he was still only a child, the world around him began to shift. Whispers echoed through the palace halls. The old gods will rise again. You see, Egypt had always been a land of many gods. For thousands of years, the people had called upon Ammon, the hidden one, and Ra, the sun. They had sung praises to Hathor, the joyful goddess of love, and left sweet dates and figs for Thoth, the wise ibis-headed scribe of the heavens. But during his father's reign, Akhenaten, the strange, dream-filled king, all the old gods had been cast aside. Temples were closed, statues were smashed. Only Aten, the shining sun disk, was allowed to be worshipped. And while the sun still warmed the earth, the hearts of the people had grown cold. Now, under the gentle gaze of young Tutankhamun, the time had come to bring the gods back. It began slowly. One morning, Just as the sky turned from gray to gold, a small procession marched through the streets of Thebes, the sacred city. Priests in white robes carried bundles of papyrus scrolls and incense burners. They stopped before the ruined temple of Amun-Ra, its walls cracked and darkened by years of silence. The oldest priest, a man whose voice was soft but strong, stepped forward and whispered, "Lord, Amen, forgotten but not gone, we call to you. Return to your house, return to your people." And just like that, the air felt warmer, the temple lighter. Birds sang. A breeze stirred the faded banners on the gates. Word spread across the land. In small villages along the Nile, people began offering bread and beer at the shrines once more. In cities, the statues of Isis, Anubis, and Osiris were gently lifted from hidden places and returned to their altars. The gods were not angry, they were patient, and now they returned with silent smiles. Back in the palace, young Tutankhamun sat in his chamber, listening to his advisor Ai, who knelt beside a scroll filled with sacred hymns. "You see, my king," I said gently, "the people feel peace when the old gods walk beside them. They fear the loneliness of one god above all others. They long for the comfort of many faces in the heavens." Tutankhamun nodded slowly. "Then we will bring them back," he said. "Let the gods return. Let their names be spoken." And so it was. Tutankhamun's royal decree went out, written in the language of the ancients, carved into stone and painted on temple walls. The gods who were banished shall be restored. Their temples shall rise again. Their names shall be honored. With each passing moon, the land bloomed. Fields grew greener. The river flowed with strength. It was as though Egypt herself was waking from a long, troubled sleep. In the city of Karnak, the great temple of Amun was rebuilt stone by stone. Tutankhamun sent workers and artists to repair what had been broken. Bright colors returned to the sacred halls. Golden altars were polished until they gleamed like the sun. And as the gods returned to their homes, the people returned to joy. They sang once more. They danced in festivals beneath the stars. Children carried small clay figures of Base, the protector of households, and laughed without fear. Women wore amulets of Hathor, and farmers offered prayers to Osiris for fertile soil. All the while, Tutankhamun watched. He listened. He learned. And though he was young, he understood something very old. A king does not rule alone. He walks beside his people. He walks beneath the gaze of gods. That evening, after a day of temple visits and scroll readings, Tutankhamun stood at the edge of the palace balcony, the warm wind brushing against his cheeks. Below, the city lights flickered like tiny stars on earth. Beside him stood Enkidu, his young queen and companion. She was wise beyond her years, with dark, curious eyes and a quiet strength. "The people are smiling again," she said softly. "Yes," Tutankhamun replied, looking up at the moon. "It's as if the gods had only been sleeping. Now they're awake." And as the breeze whispered through the palm trees, the boy king closed his eyes. His heart was calm. For that night, Egypt was at peace and the gods had returned home. When the morning sun lifted its golden face over the horizon, its rays spilled across the city like a soft blanket of light. The sacred city of Thebes, ancient and proud, stirred with life once more. From the quiet courtyards of the palace to the towering columns of the temple, every stone and shadow told stories of gods and kings, of battles and blessings. Tutankhamun rose early that day, earlier than usual. The birds had not yet begun their songs, and the sky was still painted in shades of silver and rose. His sandals were tied with care by Pharaoh, and a soft cloak of deep blue linen rested on his shoulders. "Where are we going, my king?" Pharaoh asked, as he handed the boy his staff. "To see the city," Tutankhamun said, with the hint of a smile. "To listen to it." Thebes was alive in a way that could not be heard from behind palace walls. Tutankhamun had walked its gardens and courtyards, but today he wanted to see the city with his own eyes, not as a king in procession, but as a boy in search of truth. With a small escort, they passed through the gates just as the first merchants were opening their stalls. The smells of warm bread and fresh figs filled the air. Potters shaped their clay in silence, their hands steady and slow. Children ran barefoot through the dust, their laughter as soft as the rustling of leaves. No one shouted, no one bowed deeply. They simply watched the quiet group pass by and nodded politely. Perhaps they knew who he was, or perhaps they thought he was just another noble boy with guards. But Tutankhamun wasn't looking to be seen. He was looking to understand. They passed by the sacred lake near the temple of Karnak, where priests in white robes were already beginning their morning rituals. The sound of water lapping against the stone edge was gentle and comforting. A young priest paused, looked up, and gave a slow nod of respect. Tutankhamun nodded back. "Do you hear it?" he asked Pharaoh quietly. "Hear what, my king?" "The silence, not of emptiness, but of peace." Pharaoh smiled, understanding. "Thebes is breathing again." They walked on, passing through shaded alleys where cats lounged lazily and old men told stories to wide-eyed listeners. One of them, a man with a wrinkled face like a dried fig, was speaking in hushed tones about the gods of Old Dove, how Thoth once wrote the names of stars, and how Anubis guided souls in the afterlife. Tutankhamun sat on a nearby step, hidden in the shadow of his cloak, and listened. "The gods," the old man said, "have not forgotten us. We may lose our way for a while, but they are patient. They wait for our hearts to remember." The boy king's heart swelled with something quiet and powerful, not pride, not duty, something gentler, like a promise being kept. Later that day, as the sun stood high and the streets filled with footsteps, Tutankhamun visited one of the scribes' schools. Children were bent over tablets of clay, learning to shape the curves of hieroglyphs. "Saul, read, I, son." The master of the school bowed respectfully as Tutankhamun entered. "Would you like to see what we've written today, Majesty?" the teacher asked. Tutankhamun nodded. A boy, no older than 10, stood up and shyly brought forward his tablet. On it were the symbols for truth, heart, and light. The scribe explained. He tried to write the phrase, "May my heart be light with truth." Tutankhamun smiled. "That's a very wise thing to write." He handed the tablet back gently and whispered, "Never stop writing the truth. The gods listen, even to boys." The student's eyes lit up, and he bowed so deeply that his forehead touched the floor. By the time the sun began to lean westward, casting long shadows over the sacred city, Tutankhamun returned to the palace. The golden doors opened silently, and Ankhesenamun was waiting, seated near the fountain in the garden. "You were gone long," she said, her voice soft. "I had much to see," Tutankhamun replied, sitting beside her. "Thebes is full of quiet voices. They speak through stones, through stories, through laughter. The city is healing." Ankhesenamun plucked a lotus flower from the pond and twirled it between her fingers. "And so are you." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sunlight slip behind the tall temple walls. Somewhere in the distance, a harp was being played its music, like water gently flowing over polished stones. Tutankhamun leaned his head back, gazing at the sky. "We must take care of this place," he murmured, "not just with gold and soldiers, but with kindness." "You are doing that already," she whispered, "and the gods know it." That night, as the stars returned, one by one to their places in the sky, Tutankhamun lay in bed, the sounds of the city still echoing gently in his mind. He thought of the boy at the school, of the priest at the temple, of the old storyteller by the alley. The city had secrets, yes, but not the kind that were hidden in darkness. They were soft secrets, wrapped in memory and wisdom, waiting to be heard by a king with a quiet heart. And as sleep carried him away, the boy who had become Pharaoh dreamed not of gold or war, but of Thebes alive, breathing, glowing beneath the eternal stars. There was a place in the royal palace that not many knew about. It was hidden behind a tall wall of carved stone, where the vines grew thick and the fig trees curled their branches like outstretched arms. To the world outside, it was just another corner of the palace, but to Tutankhamun, it was a secret place of quiet magic. He called it the Garden of Dreams. It wasn't large nor grand like the courts of marble or the gold-lined audience halls. Soft reeds swayed in the breeze, and tiny frogs sang in the lotus pond. Papyrus plants whispered ancient poems, and every flower seemed to know the boy king by name. It was here, in this little garden, that Tutankhamun often went when the world felt too big. One late afternoon, as the sun stretched its golden fingers across the palace walls, Tutankhamun slipped quietly into the garden. Pharaoh followed a few paces behind, but did not speak. He knew this place was sacred not because priests had blessed it, but because here Tutankhamun found his thoughts. Birds chirped gently above, and somewhere nearby a bee danced among the blue lilies. "Pharaoh, Tutankhamun said at last, his voice as calm as the water in the pool. "Do the gods dream, too?" Pharaoh, who had heard many strange and beautiful questions from his young king, smiled. "I believe they do." Tutankhamun nodded slowly. "Then maybe this garden is a piece of their dream." He leaned back on the cool grass, folding his hands beneath his head, and let his eyes drift closed. And there, as the leaves rustled above him and the wind hummed a soft tune, a dream came to him. It was not the kind of dream that comes with thunder and visions of fire. It was gentle like moonlight on water. In the dream, Tutankhamun stood in the middle of the Nile, but the river was not made of water. It flowed with starlight, shimmering and soft. On either side, the gods stood tall and silent, Thoth with his ibis head writing on a scroll made of clouds, Isis glowing with a mother's love, and Amun hidden in a robe of night, his eyes like deep wells of knowing. The gods did not speak, but he felt their thoughts. They showed him the kingdom green fields, happy children, temples filled with songs. They showed him balance, and then, slowly, the dream shifted, and the river narrowed, as if warning him that the path ahead would not always be wide and smooth. He saw a mountain of gold, but around it, shadows moved. He saw a chariot gleaming in the sun, but the sun grew dim, pure, open, floating on the starlit river. When Tutankhamun awoke, the sky had deepened into twilight. The first stars blinked overhead, and a gentle warmth filled the garden air. "Did you sleep, Majesty?" Pharaoh asked, offering a fig from his pouch. "I dreamed," Tutankhamun replied, and the dream was full of both light and shadow. He had always believed that some dreams were not just dreams, but messages. That night, Tutankhamun wrote in his scrolls. Though his handwriting was still that of a boy, he wrote with care. The gods speak in silence, and in silence I will listen. If my steps lead through shadow, let me remember the light. In the days that followed, the Garden of Dreams became more than just a resting place. Tutankhamun had benches brought in, not grand ones, but smooth stones covered in linen. He asked for a small library of scrolls to be placed under a shaded alcove, and from time to time he would sit with the old scribes and read stories of pharaohs who came before. He read of Hatshepsut, the woman who ruled as king, of Thutmose III, the warrior pharaoh who led armies of Khufu, whose pyramid touched the sky. But none of them had a garden like this, and none of them, he thought, were quite like him. One evening, Ankhesenamun joined him there. She came barefoot, her hair woven with lotus petals, her laughter soft like wind through reeds. "You've made this place beautiful," she said. "I didn't make it," Tutankhamun replied. "It was always here. I only listened." They sat beneath the stars, dipping their fingers into the pond and watching the ripples shimmer. "Do you think," he asked her, "that dreams can guide a king?" "I think dreams are the voice of the soul," she said. "And you have a quiet, brave soul, Tutankhamun," he smiled shyly. They said nothing more that night. Words were not needed. For the garden, the stars, and the gentle dreams spoke all that had to be said. The morning came softly, as it always did in the land of the Nile first, with a pale golden glow along the eastern horizon, then with the hush of birds stretching their wings, and finally with the distant calls of the fishermen setting out into the river's mirror-like waters. But on this morning, something else stirred. Not just the breeze or the city streets, but hammers, chisels, and the voices of architects. For today, Egypt would begin to rise again. Tutankhamun stood at the edge of the great temple in Thebes, where sunlight poured through broken columns like blessings from the sky. Rubble still lay in many places, pillars cracked, statues missing arms, walls with faded paint. This temple had once belonged to Amun, and now, under the watch of the boy king, it would live again. "It must be rebuilt," he said simply. Beside him, his advisor, I nodded, the lines of age in his face softened by the warmth of the morning. "Yes, my king, and it shall be grand once more." But Tutankhamun turned his eyes not to grandeur, but to meaning. "Not only grand," he whispered. "True, let it speak not only to gods, but to people. Let them come here and feel peace." And so the royal builders were called. They came from far and near, stonemasons from the quarries of Aswan, painters from the sacred schools of Heliopolis, carpenters from the villages along the Nile. They arrived not in silence, but in a low hum of songs, greetings, and the shuffling of tired sandals. Tutankhamun greeted them himself, not as a distant pharaoh from a high throne, but as a gentle voice among friends. "You have come to raise Egypt's heart," he told them, his voice carrying over the courtyard like a lullaby. "You have come to build not only walls, but hope." And so the work began. From sunrise to sunset, the sounds of careful labor filled the air. Stone met stone with gentle rhythm. Paint met plaster in graceful strokes of red, blue, and gold. The workers did not rush. They moved slowly, like the Nile, steady and sure. Each morning, Tutankhamun walked among them. Sometimes he asked questions. Sometimes he simply listened. He learned the names of the builders, the painters, and even the boy who brought water in clay jars from the well. One day, he stopped beside a sculptor who was carving the face of the goddess Mut into a block of limestone. The man's hands were dusty, but his touch was soft as he shaped the eyes. "Why do you carve so carefully?" Tutankhamun asked. The sculptor smiled. "Because she sees through the stone, and I want her to see joy." The king was quiet for a moment, then replied, "Then we are alike. I build so my people can feel joy too." Weeks passed, and the temple grew taller, brighter, more beautiful. Its columns were wrapped in colorful vines and lotus blossoms. Its inner halls glowed with painted stars. The sanctuary was filled with fresh offerings, bread, water, lilies, and soft prayers. But it wasn't only the great temples that were rebuilt. Under Tutankhamun's orders, smaller shrines, once forgotten in villages and deserts, were repaired and reopened. Bridges across canals were mended. Schools received new papyrus scrolls. Even homes for orphans were cleaned and given new blankets. Egypt was not just being rebuilt in stone. It was being rebuilt in spirit. One afternoon, as the workers rested in the shade and shared dates and honeyed bread, Tutankhamun sat beside a small pool in the palace garden. His feet dipped into the water. And Ankhesenamun sat nearby, her hands weaving a bracelet of tiny turquoise beads. "They're building with love," he said. "Yes," she replied, threading another bead onto the cord. "Because you lead with love." Tutankhamun lowered his eyes. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm still too young to build a kingdom." Ankhesenamun reached out and gently pressed the bracelet into his palm. Love is never too young, and when it's given freely, even the gods listen. He smiled, turning the bracelet in his fingers. "Then I hope they are listening now." "They are," she said. "I feel it." And indeed, something had changed in Egypt. It could be felt, not in the loud declarations of the court, but in the quiet places, in the whispers of a mother thanking Hathor for her child's safe birth, in the careful sweeping of a temple floor by a humble priest, in the laughter of builders sharing figs beneath the columns they helped raise. Tutankhamun had not led armies. He had not built the tallest obelisks, but he was rebuilding something deeper: trust, harmony, the soul of a nation. That night, as the full moon bathed the city in silver, Tutankhamun stood once more before the newly painted temple wall. A great scene had been drawn. Himself, the boy king, offering lotus flowers to Ammon beneath a sky of golden stars. He looked at it not with pride, but with hope. Then he whispered to the wind, "May this never be forgotten, not because it is beautiful, but because it was built with care." And with that, he returned to his chambers, where Pemhu had lit the oil lamps and laid out fresh scrolls for the next day's thoughts. As Tutankhamun drifted into sleep, his dreams were filled, not with palaces or crowns, but with walls being lifted, hands building together, and a land slowly healing, one stone at a time. The skies over Thebes had grown very clear. It was the season when the Nile had already returned to its banks, leaving behind rich black soil in the fields, and the nights, though warm, had a breeze that whispered through the palm trees like the hush of distant voices. One evening, after a long day spent among the builders and scribes, Tutankhamun stood on a high balcony in the palace, gazing upward. The stars had begun to blink into view, quiet and ancient. They came slowly at first, like shy dancers taking their places, until the heavens sparkled with their full and silent audience. "Look," said the young king softly to himself, "so many." A servant, hearing his voice, stepped forward. "Shall I bring the stargazer, Majesty?" Tutankhamun hesitated for only a moment, then nodded. "Yes, bring the one who listens to the sky." Not long after, a tall, quiet man appeared. His name was Nakht, a priest of the Temple of Thoth, and an astrologer trained to read the stars, not as dots in the sky, but as messages, gentle signs left behind by gods older than any scroll. He wore a robe the color of ink and a collar of lapis beads that shimmered in the moonlight. "You called, Great One?" he asked with a bow. Tutankhamun gestured to the night sky. "They speak, don't they? The stars? I want to know what they're saying." Nakht smiled and knelt beside the young king. "They do speak, but not with voices like ours. They speak in time, in light, in paths so old they've worn grooves in the sky." The boy king lay on a soft cushion, his eyes fixed upward, and listened as Nakht began to speak not as a teacher, but as a storyteller. "The stars," Nakht said gently, "are the oldest scribes of all. Before stone, before ink, before kings, they were writing stories across the heavens." He pointed toward the east. "There, do you see that crooked line of stars? That is the scarab of the dawn. It rises just before the sun each season to remind us of rebirth. When that star appears, we know that change is coming." Tutankhamun squinted. "It's small." "Yes," Nakht nodded. "But even the smallest light has a message." He pointed again, this time to the north. "There is the throne of Osiris, the great god of the afterlife. That constellation never sets. It stays in the sky all year, watching, guiding. To the priests, it means that judgment is always near, but to us, it means that we are never alone." Tutankhamun felt a warmth in his chest, not from the air, but from a sense that something great and kind was watching, far above. "And that one?" he asked, pointing to a bright star just above the horizon. "That is Sopdet," Nakht whispered, "whom the Greeks will one day call Sirius. When she appears in the summer sky, she brings the flooding of the Nile, and life returns to Egypt. She is the river's first heartbeat." The king was quiet for a long time. "Are our lives written in the stars?" he finally asked. "Is my story already known to them?" Nakht's answer came gently, like the breeze in the reeds. "They see the river, but not every ripple. They see the path, but not each footstep. The stars show the sky, but you must choose how to sail beneath it." Tutankhamun closed his eyes, listening not only to Nakht's voice, but to the soft music of the night. A bird calling from a rooftop, the hush of palm fronds brushing stone, the slow beat of his own heart. From that night onward, Tutankhamun often spent time beneath the stars. He had a stone bench placed on the palace rooftop, not far from the observatory tower. There, wrapped in linen robes and covered in a blanket of soft wool, he would lie back and watch the heavens shift above him. And sometimes he dreamed not of war or treasure, but of great boats sailing through starlit skies. In one dream, he was on the solar bark, the ship that carried the sun god Ra across the sky. The stars watched him, blinking slowly, as he steered the vessel with a golden oar. Beside him stood Thoth, the god of wisdom, whispering secrets into the wind. In another dream, he walked among the stars, like stepping stones, each one lighting up beneath his feet. He met the spirit of his father there, shining bright and peaceful, and the two of them laughed like they had when he was a child. And in his favorite dream of all, he saw the entire land of Egypt beneath him, sleeping. He touched a star, and the rivers lit up, and every temple glowed, and all the people smiled in their sleeps, and loved, and free. One morning, as the light began to touch the edges of the horizon, Tutankhamun found him still on the rooftop, his face turned to the pale dawn. "Did you sleep?" she asked gently. Tutankhamun smiled, slow and soft. "No, but I listened. The stars have been singing all night." "And what did they sing?" she asked, settling beside him. "That the world is big," he said, "but not too big to understand, and that I must walk slowly, but never stop." She took his hand, warm and steady. "Then I will walk with you, under any sky." They sat like that until the sun finally rose, painting the palace walls with light. And as the people of Thebes began their day waking children, preparing bread, opening temple doors, the boy who was king stood once more, ready to walk his path, guided by the soft, ancient voice of the stars. It was just after sunrise when the stranger arrived at the gates of the palace. The guards, who were used to fishermen, scribes, and dusty travelers from nearby towns, paused when they saw him. He was tall and quiet, wearing a long robe of soft linen dyed deep blue, the color of the night sky just before dawn. But it was his face that held them still, for his face was hidden behind a painted mask. It was not a mask of gold or jewels, like the ones worn in funerals. No, this one was made of painted wood and shaped with care. It showed a gentle smile, long almond-shaped eyes, and delicate lines that curled like vines along the cheeks. The stranger's eyes behind it glimmered kindly, as if they held 1,000 stories. He bowed deeply. "I am a traveler from Byblos, where cedar trees climb the cliffs and stories sail across the sea." But they had learned one thing from their king: listen first, then decide. So the stranger was brought into the outer courtyard, where he sat on a low cushion and drank cool water. Word reached the young king quickly, for Tutankhamun was already awake, writing in his scrolls and feeding crumbs to the birds that gathered on the windowsill. "A masked traveler," the boy king said, tilting his head. "That sounds like the beginning of a dream." And so, without delay, Tutankhamun had the stranger brought to the Garden of Dreams, the quietest and gentlest place for guests. The stranger bowed again when he entered, his mask catching the morning sun like a polished pebble. He did not remove it, but his voice was warm and soft. "Great one," he said, "I have traveled across mountains and deserts, through ports and past pyramids, and now I bring you the one thing I carry from every land I visit, a story." Tutankhamun smiled, delighted. "Then you are welcome, storyteller. Sit here near the lotus pond. The frogs are the best audience of all." The stranger laughed gently and settled beside the water. "I have walked through the cedar forests of Byblos," he said, "where the trees are so tall they seem to brush the sky. There I met a girl who wore silver in her hair and sang songs to the moon. She taught me that the moon listens best when you whisper to it." Tutankhamun closed his eyes, imagining moonlight and silver songs. "Then I sailed to the island of Crete," the stranger continued, "where the sea is as blue as lapis, and the winds tell riddles in the sails. There the people dance in wide circles and paint their stories on pottery. They told me even a bowl can hold a legend." "Did you bring one?" Tutankhamun asked softly. The stranger nodded and reached into a small satchel. He pulled out a simple clay cup, painted with swirling shapes and a tiny dolphin leaping over waves. "The people there say the sky is a scroll, and every star a word from the gods." Tutankhamun smiled at that, remembering Nakt's voice under the stars. "I met a boy who had never seen the sea, but could describe it perfectly because his grandmother had told him stories. He said, "A good story is like a river, it can reach places you've never been." For a long moment after the tale ended, there was silence. The garden held its breath. The frogs blinked, and Tutankhamun spoke in a whisper. "Then let me give you something in return." He stood and walked to the tree where he often dreamed. From its branches, he picked a single blossomer blue lotus, soft and fresh. He placed it in the stranger's hand. "This is the story of Egypt," he said. "It grows from the mud, reaches through the water, and opens only when the light touches it." The stranger bowed deeply. "Then I will carry it across the world. And when they ask me what Egypt is, I will say, a flower that listens to the sun." Before the sun had climbed too high, the stranger rose to leave. Still wearing the painted mask, he bowed once more to the boy king and to Ankhesenamun. And though he never saw the stranger again, Tutankhamun knew something had changed. He felt it in the air, in the earth, and in his heart, because now he knew Egypt was not alone. It was part of a great sleeping world. A world made not only of temples and treasures, but of stories. That night, Tutankhamun dreamed of a boat with sails made of stars, carrying a flower across oceans. And in every port, someone listened, someone smiled, and someone said, "Tell me more." And so, the stories sailed on. Far to the south of Thebes, where the Nile winds and widens through reeds and tangled marshes, there was a temple so old that even the stones whispered. It was the temple of Sobek, the crocodile god guardian of the waters, protector of balance, and keeper of ancient strength. Most people feared Sobek, for he wore the shape of a crocodile and lived in the wild places. His teeth were sharp, and his stare was still. But the priests who served him said that fear was only the outer shell of wisdom, and that to know Sobek was to know how to be brave. And so, one morning, when the wind was soft and the lotus blossoms were wide awake, Tutankhamun set out to visit this hidden temple. The journey was slow. The king's bark moved carefully through the marshes, guided by long poles and narrow paths in the water. The air smelled of earth and water and warm green leaves. Dragonflies danced above the ripples. Birds with long legs stepped carefully between lily pads. And Ankhesenamun sat beside him, her hand in his. "Are you afraid?" she asked gently. He looked at the reeds, at the still dark water, and then at the horizon. "A little," she nodded. "Then we are already brave." Tutankhamun smiled. "Why?" "Because brave people don't wait to stop being afraid. They walk anyway." By midday, the temple appeared like a secret carved into the land. Low and wide, with carved stones that peeked from behind vines, it rose slowly from the riverbank like something half asleep. Statues of crocodiles lined the path, each with golden sun discs on their heads and smooth, polished teeth. At the top of the steps stood the high priest of Sobeka, tall man wrapped in robes the color of river clay. His face was calm, and his eyes were as still as the water. "Welcome, Pharaoh of the living Nile," he said, bowing. "You come with the courage to enter silence." Tutankhamun stepped forward, slow and thoughtful. "I have come to listen." Inside, the temple was cool and shadowed. The walls were covered in carvings, scenes of Sobek taming floods, protecting kings, and watching from the riverbanks. There were no crowds here, no gold, no dancers. Only hush, like a breath held gently. The priest led the young king to a wide hall, where the light trickled down through small openings in the ceiling. In the center was a pool dark and still, and Beside it sat a great stone image of Sobek, carved with care and covered in fresh green leaves. The priest spoke in a low voice. "This is the sacred pool. Here, Sobek breathes." Tutankhamun looked into the water. It was perfectly still, but deep and dark and quiet. "What do I do?" he asked. The priest replied, "Sit beside the pool, wait and listen. Sobek does not shout, he waits for your silence to grow." And so Tutankhamun sat. He did not speak, he did not move. He simply sat, his legs folded, his breath slowing. Time passed like a slow cloud. He heard the faint drip of water, the soft flick of a lizard's tail on stone, the beating of his own heart. And then he wasn't sure when or how, but the water began to breathe. Just a little ripple, just a faint motion, as if the pool itself had sighed. It wasn't a crocodile rising from the depths, or a god stepping from the shadows. It was quieter than that. Tutankhamun felt it, not just in his ears, but in his chest. A quiet message, not in words, but in feeling. Be still, and you will know. Be soft, and you will be strong. Be small, and you will see. I am not only the sharp tooth, I am the calm before it. When he opened his eyes again, the water had stilled. The priest was waiting. So was Enki. Tutankhamun rose slowly, like someone waking from a peaceful dream. His feet made no sound on the stone. "I heard him," he said quietly. "And what did he say?" asked the priest. "He said." The boy paused, then smiled. "He said, I'm braver than I thought." Before leaving, the priest gave him a small carved amulet, a tiny crocodile made of green jasper. "For your heart," he said. "When you hold it, remember the silence. Remember the breath beneath the water." The journey home was peaceful. Tutankhamun sat at the front of the boat, holding the amulet, watching the ripples pass. At one point, he saw a real crocodile sunbathing on a muddy bank, still as stone. But this time, he didn't feel afraid. He simply bowed his head in respect. "Thank you, old one," he whispered, "for teaching me stillness." That night, under a silver moon, Tutankhamun slept deeply. He dreamed of dark waters and silent pools, and a great golden crocodile who rose from the deep, not to chase him, but to curl beside him, its body warm and calm. They breathed together, and the stars blinked slowly overhead. And in his sleep, Tutankhamun smiled. The city of Thebes stirred with excitement. It was the time of year when the Nile grew quiet and calm, when the skies turned silver and the evenings stretched long into gentle, glowing nights. It was the perfect season for a celebration, a festival, not of gold or grandeur, but of light. Tutankhamun had an idea, a soft, glowing idea that came to him in the quiet hours after sunset, when he sat in his garden and watched the oil lamps flicker in the breeze. What if, he said one evening, every house in Thebes lit a lamp together, a light for peace, a light for hope, a light for dreams. And Kisanoman looked up from the embroidery in her lap. "A light for those who sleep," she whispered. "And for those who watch the stars." Tutankhamun nodded. Yes, a festival of 1,000 lamps. And so the idea was born. The next morning, messengers were sent across the city and beyond, to the fishers on the riverbanks, to the farmers in the fields, to the priests in the temples, and even to the children who played in the courtyards. On the night of the full moon, they said, let every home light a lamp, a gentle flame, a quiet glow. No drums, no trumpets, just light. The people were curious and delighted, and quietly moved. They began preparing their lamps, simple clay bowls, wide and shallow, filled with oil, and fitted with soft wicks made from linen. Some painted theirs with stars and flowers. Others wrapped them in tiny reeds. Children helped shape new ones from river clay, giggling as they smoothed the edges. And every day, the lamps gathered hundreds of them, waiting to bloom. The night came slowly, like a story beginning its first line. The sky turned the color of lavender. A breeze whispered through the sycamores. Frogs sang in the distance, and the moon began to rise, a perfect round pearl, glowing softly above the rooftops of Thebes. And then, one by one, the lights began to flicker. In the northern quarter, a small girl with her grandmother lit the first lamp and placed it on their windowsill. In the southern fields, a family of farmers lit theirs and set it gently in the irrigation stream. By the palace gates, soldiers stood with lamps in their hands, their armor glowing faintly in the golden light. And from the rooftop of the palace, Tutankhamun watched, his heart filled slowly, like a cup being filled with light. He held his own lamps, small, carved with tiny birds, zanned with Ankhesenamen at his side. He touched the wick to flame. It caught quietly. The flame danced, warm and steady. They set it on the ledge and looked out, and what they saw took their breath away. Thebes was glowing, not with fire or celebration, but with quiet, golden peace. Lamps lined the streets. Lamps floated on water. Lamps glowed in temple courtyards and market stalls. There were even lamps nestled in trees and set gently among flower beds. The Nile itself reflected them all, as if the river had become a second sky. It looked as though the stars had come down to earth. Tutankhamun smiled. "Look," he whispered, "they're dreaming with their eyes open." Ankhesenamen squeezed his hand. "This is what you gave them, not treasure or power, but light, hope." He nodded, eyes still wide, and they gave it back, all of them. In a quiet square near the temple of Hathor, a boy placed a lamp next to the statue of the goddess and whispered, "For my brother, who sleeps beneath the fields." In the boatyards, old fishermen hummed lullabies as their lamps bobbed on the gentle tide. In a shaded courtyard, a blind woman ran her fingers over the warm clay of her lamp and smiled at the heat of its glow. And in every corner of the city, people stood still, not talking, not rushing, just being, just watching the light. Later that night, when the city was wrapped in the softest silence, Tutankhamun returned to his garden. The lamps there flickered gently around the lotus pond, and a warm hush filled the air like a soft blanket over dreams. He sat beneath the sycamore tree, eyes half closed. In his lap lay a new scroll. On it, in delicate ink, he had written, "Let it find the quiet places. Let it shine and rest and remind that even in stillness you are seen." He set down the scroll and let the lamplight brush his face. Above, the moon hung silently. Below, Thebes slept in gold, and Tutankhamun, the boy king, closed his eyes not in worry or weariness, but in peace. It began with a dream, not the kind that flies with wings or sings with stars, but a quiet one, a dream made of stone and sand and whispers. Tutankhamun saw it clearly, even as he slept beneath the moonlit silk canopy. A long hallway, dark and cool, a soft breeze stirring the dust, and at the end, a door, half buried beneath golden sand, its edges lost to time. The voice in the dream was not frightening. It was gentle, old, patient. "You have listened to the wind. You have followed the river. Now follow the silence. The door is waiting." When he awoke, the air was still, but something tugged softly inside him, like a thread woven into his heart. He knew the door was real. He told no one at first, not even Ankhesenamun. He rose before the sun, while the birds were still quiet and the palace still slumbered. He slipped into his sandals and wrapped himself in a light cloak, the same color as the sky before dawn. With only a small lamp in hand, he walked the palace corridors, his feet silent on the cool stone. He passed rooms he knew well, libraries and courtyards, scroll rooms and servant halls. But he was looking for something else, something lost. And then, near the eastern wall, behind a faded tapestry of papyrus reeds, he found it. A staircase. It spiraled downward, chiseled long ago, the edges softened by time. He descended slowly, step by step. Each footfall sounded like a heartbeat. Below, there was nothing but dust. An old storeroom, forgotten, but Tutankhamun moved carefully, searching. And in one corner, nearly hidden behind an old chest of broken tools, he found it, the door, just as in his dream, half buried in sand, edges worn smooth, symbols barely visible, almost swallowed by time. He knelt beside it and placed his hand on the wood. It was warm. The whisper returned not from outside, but from somewhere within. To open the door, you must bring nothing but wonder. So he closed his eyes and thought not of treasure, not of power, but of stars and river songs. And the first time he held a baby bird in his hand, and then click, the door creaked open, slow and quiet, like a yawn from the earth itself. Inside was a chamber, no larger than a gardener's hut. Its walls were painted with scenes, not bold, but soft, faded, like old dreams. A boy standing in a field of reeds. A woman holding a light to the stars. A crocodile sleeping beneath a tree. There were no treasures, no gold, no jewels, only a small box in the center of the room, made of ebony wood, smooth and simple. Tutankhamun lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in linen, as soft as a lullaby, were 3 items. A tiny reed flute, cracked but still beautiful. A child's drawing scribbled in charcoal, showing a son and a boy beneath it, holding hands with someone tall, and a name carved into a piece of smooth shell. Khemhot, son of no crown, keeper of the boy king's first laugh. Tutankhamun blinked slowly. He did not know the name, but his heart remembered. A servant, perhaps someone gentle and kind. Someone who made him laugh when he was small. Someone who had been lost to the turning of time. Looking at the reed flute, listening to the silence. And in that stillness, he felt it. A quiet presence. A memory not made of words, but of feeling. Love, simple and soft. Like the hush of a hand brushing your hair before sleep. Like the scent of warm bread. Like a voice that says, "You are enough, just as you are." Before he left, he placed something in the box. His own drawing. A picture of the sky full of lamps, and a crocodile beside a king, and a boat made of stars. He whispered, "Thank you, Khemhot, for saving my laughter." Then he gently closed the lid and let the door close once more. He returned to his room just as the birds began to sing. Ankhesenamun stirred beside him. "You're awake early." Tutankhamun climbed into bed beside her and smiled. "I found a hidden door." She smiled sleepily. "Was there treasure?" He nodded. "Yes, but not the kind you lock away." And as the sun rose, brushing the sky with pale gold, the boy king drifted into a second sleep. This time, he dreamed not of temples or thrones, but of reed flutes, gentle hands, and a boy with a painted smile running through the fields, his laughter carrying like wind across the Nile. In the heart of the palace, where the walls were cool and the gardens always smelled of papyrus and lemon balm. Tutankhamun sat beneath a tree of gold leaves, not gold like treasure, but gold like sunrise, soft, warm, glowing with life. He had been thinking, not about wars or taxes or foreign gifts, but about something quieter, something older than kings and older than time. He was thinking about truth, and what it meant to live a life as light as a feather. It was Solomon who first spoke of it, one evening as they watched fireflies dance over the lotus pond. She said, "Do you remember the stories of Tutankhamun?" Nodded slowly. "The goddess of balance?" "Yes," she said. "Of truth, of justice, of what is right, the one who weighs your heart against a feather when your soul moves to the stars." He looked up at the stars, then, blinking softly, "What if a heart is heavy? Then it must learn to be light again," she whispered, "before the weighing ever comes." And so Tutankhamun decided to learn more. He would go visit the oldest judge in Thebes, a man called Thamos, who had served kings before Tutankhamun was even born. Thamos lived in a small, quiet house on the edge of the temple gardens, not grand, not decorated, just peaceful. He wore plain linen and walked with a polished staff, and his eyes, though tired, were full of sunlight. When Tutankhamun arrived, the old man bowed only slightly and said, "So the boy who holds the throne wishes to understand the weight of the heart." Tutankhamun smiled gently. "Yes, wise one, if you will teach me." Thamos motioned to a small bench beside a pool shaded by tall date palms. "Then you must sit. You cannot learn of Mat while standing on ceremony." And so they sat, the boy king and the old judge. There were no scrolls, no rituals, only stories, soft, slow, and told between sips of cool water and the whispering of reeds. Thamos said, "When you are born, your heart is light like a bird, or a cloud, or laughter. But the world lays stones in your pocket, jealousy, anger, pride." Tutankhamun nodded slowly. Thamos continued, "To live well is to empty your pockets, little by little, to forgive, to love, to listen, to walk gently." Tutankhamun asked, "But what if I make mistakes?" The old man smiled. "You will. That is certain. But Mat does not ask for perfection. She only asks for effort and honesty and a heart that returns to balance." As the sun moved across the sky, the judge took out a small box of his own. Inside was a single ostrich feather, long and white, with a soft curve, still as snow. "This," he said, "is a symbol of Mat." Tutankhamun reached out and gently touched it. It trembled in the breeze, as if even the air dared not press too hard. "Hold it," Thamos said. The king lifted it in both hands, as though holding a star. "It's lighter than anything," he whispered. "Yes," said the judge, "and yet it decides everything. When your heart is placed on the scale beside it, if your heart is heavier, it will not rise. But if your heart has let go of its burdens, it floats, it moves on, it joins the stars." Tutankhamun held the feather for a long while, his eyes deep and still. That evening, as the palace turned golden in the setting sun, the boy king returned with the feather wrapped in linen, resting gently beside his bed. He did not place it in a box, or behind glass, or upon a shelf. Instead, he left it beside his dreams, so that when he slept, he would remember to let go of anger, to listen before speaking, to forgive his own stumbles and those of others, to walk with a heart as quiet and kind as moonlight. That night, he dreamed of a great scale rising above the Nile. On one side was the feather, on the other his heart, and slowly, gently, they balanced perfectly. and far in the sky, Mat smiled, her wings stretching wide like the dawn. There were times, even for kings, when fear curled like a shadow beneath the heart. Not fear of battles or storms, but the quiet kind, the kind that sat still and watched and waited. It was on one of those days that Tutankhamun discovered the lion beneath the throne. Not a real lion, of course. Not one with claws and teeth and golden fur, but something just as real and just as strong. It started with a letter, a scroll tied with silk, bearing the seal of a foreign ruler. Inside, a message not of friendship, but of challenge. A neighboring kingdom was building walls, preparing spears. Rumors whispered like wind through the palace halls. Tutankhamun's advisors came quickly, voices tight, eyes sharp. They spoke of defenses, of alliances, of war. But Tutankhamun sat silent, because, deep inside his chest, something had stirred. A roar, low and ancient, not anger, not pride, but something older, fear. That night, he sat alone in the throne room, the great seat carved of ebony and ivory, gleaming with lion's paws and wings. But beneath it, the space felt hollow, and the fear still there, still waiting. He whispered aloud, "What if I am not strong enough?" And the silence answered back, until a soft paw-step. Tutankhamun looked up, but no guard stood at the door, no priest, no servant, only the shape of something golden in the corner of the room. A lion. Its mane shimmered like sunlight. Its eyes were deep amber. It did not growl. It did not leap. It just watched him, and then it spoke, not with lips, but with thought, a voice deep as the Nile's oldest bend. "I have always been beneath your throne, little king. I am your courage. You have only forgotten my name." Tutankhamun blinked slowly. "My courage? But I am afraid." "Courage is not the absence of fear," the lion said. "It is the one who walks beside it. Sit upon your throne, and I will rise beneath it." The king walked toward the throne. His heart still trembled, but each step made the tremble smaller. The lion followed, silent and strong. Tutankhamun sat, and the throne once cold now felt anchored, grounded, alive, because beneath it, curled beneath wood and gold, was the lion. From that day on, the boy king faced his fears, not with a sword, but with stillness. He met with foreign messengers, not with raised voices, but with eyes that did not blink. He made peace not by bending, but by standing gently firm. And those who came to see him left whispering, "There is something beneath that throne, something strong, something wild, something watching." But Tutankhamun smiled, because he knew the truth. It was his lion, and it belonged to him. That evening, in the quiet hush of his garden, Tutankhamun whispered to Ankhesenamun, "I met my fear today." She looked up from her scroll. "And did it scare you?" He nodded. "Yes, but I sat with it anyway." She smiled and reached for his hand. "Then you are braver than most." And under the stars, they listened, not to songs, not to flutes, but to the deep, steady purring of something proud and ancient. And far beneath the throne, curled in peace, waiting to rise again, whenever he was needed. In the quiet corners of the palace, where sunlight slipped through carved stone screens and dust danced like golden snow, there lived a man with paint on his hands. He was not a priest, nor a soldier, nor a scribe. He had no title, no attendance, no ring of gold on his finger, but he had something even rarer. He had patience, and a brush, and a gift for painting time. Tutankhamun found him by accident. On a day when the court had grown loud and tangled, advisors talking over one another, scrolls piling higher than papyrus stalks, everyone asking the young king to choose, to sign, to speak. But Tutankhamun needed silence, so he slipped away, down through the stone passageways, past the garden where ibises walked like old priests, and into a small, sunlit courtyard he had never noticed before. There a man knelt on a wooden mat. His robes were plain, his sandals worn, but his fingers moved with such care, such quiet joy, that the air itself seemed to hush and lean closer. The wall he painted showed no battles, no gods, no kings, only life. A girl pouring water from a clay jug, a fisherman with a basket of shining fish, an old woman braiding a child's hair, and at the center, a wide open eye, full of wonder. Tutankhamun stepped closer. The painter turned. His face was lined, but not tired. He bowed. "Your Majesty, you may rise," Tutankhamun said, smiling gently. "What is your name?" The man dipped his brush into blue. "They call me Senub, my king." "And what are you painting?" Senub paused. "I am painting moments." Tutankhamun sat beside him. The stones were warm beneath his hands. "Do you mean memories?" the king asked. "No," said Senub. "Memories fade. I paint what is too small to remember, but too beautiful to lose." He pointed to the eye in the center of the wall. "That is time," he said, watching, not as a god, but as a quiet friend. Tutankhamun was silent. Then he asked, "Will these paintings last forever?" Senub smiled. "Nothing lasts forever. But if I paint carefully soft strokes, steady heart, they may last long enough to reach someone who needs them." The boy king looked at the painted girl with the jug and the fisherman's gentle hands, and he felt something stir, something soft. Every day that week, Tutankhamun returned to the courtyard. He brought no guards, no scribes, only himself, and sometimes Ankhesenamun, who would sit with a small jar of pigment in her lap, quiet and smiling. Senub showed them how to grind stone into color, yellow from ochre, red from iron, green from crushed malachite. He taught them to mix it with gum from the acacia tree, to wait, to listen. "Painting," he said, "is not about what you want to say. It is about what the moment is already whispering." One day, Senub gave the king his own brush, a small one, made from reed, its bristles soft as kitten's fur. "Now you will paint time," Senub said. Tutankhamun hesitated. "What if I ruin it?" Senub laughed. "Time cannot be ruined. It can only be noticed." So the king dipped the brush in blue and slowly, gently painted a bird. Not a falcon of Horus, not a phoenix of myth, just a small bird sitting on a branch, tilting its head to the sky. Senub watched. "Very good." Tutankhamun smiled. He had never felt so calm, so still. When the painting was finished, Senub did not sign it. Instead, he turned to the king and said, "It will be found someday, not because you are a king, but because you saw something small and did not turn away." And Tutankhamun understood that some things, small things, carry forever inside them. A color, a breath, a glance. That night, Tutankhamun dreamed of a wall painted with stars, and each star was a moment he had once noticed but forgotten: a child's laugh, the first bite of a pomegranate, a drop of rain on his cheek, and somewhere in the stars, a little blue bird sat on a branch and waited. Sometimes, the loudest voices do not come from mouths, and the clearest messages are not written in ink. Sometimes, all you have to do is listen. And so it was, one soft morning, that Tutankhamun woke to the sound of wind, not a stormy wind, not the kind that lashes windows or snaps banners, but a whispering wind, like a story too shy to speak aloud. It danced through the shutters. It played with the corner of his blanket, and it called him not with words, but with a feeling, like curiosity, like wonder, like a secret wanting to be found. He rose quietly, careful not to wake Ankhesenamun, past the lotus pond, past the courtyard where Seneb's paintings dried, past the shrine where incense still curled like a cat, and then out through a narrow archway and into the open desert. The sky was pale blue, the sand was warm gold, and the wind, soft and slow, moved around him like an old friend. Tutankhamun closed his eyes. He breathed in, and it was as if the wind was speaking. Do you hear? He waited. Not with your ears, the wind seemed to say, but with your heart. And then, like small notes from an invisible song, he heard secrets, not the kind locked in scrolls, not the kind whispered behind curtains, but truths too old for paper, too wide for words. He heard the sand explaining how it carried the memory of every footstep, even after it had been blown smooth again. He heard the sun smiling, saying, even when I burn, I am only trying to light the way. And most of all, he heard the wind itself say, everything has a voice, if you are still enough to listen. He sat on a low dune and listened for a long time. He heard stories in silence. He heard meaning in movement. He heard the desert breathing, slow and deep, like the earth dreaming. And as he sat there, Tutankhamun realized something. All his life, he had been taught to speak, to lead, to decide, to command. But here, the desert taught him to pause, to hear the world, not as a king, but as a boy with an open heart. When the wind quieted and the sun stretched higher in the sky, he rose. He did not speak. He did not hurry. He simply walked home, a little lighter than before, carrying with him not scrolls or gems or names, but silence, the kind that hums with life, the kind that waits for no reply. That evening, when Ankhesenamun asked where he had gone, Tutankhamun only smiled and said, I went to speak with the wind. She laughed softly. And what did it say? He leaned back on the cushions, eyes half closed. It said that even when we do not speak, we are still listening. And as they drifted to sleep, the wind curled once more through the open window, tugging gently at the curtain, soft as breath. It had many more secrets to tell, but for now it was enough. For the king was listening, and the world was at peace. There was a part of the palace that no one remembered. No guards, no scribes, not even the high priests with their perfect scrolls knew it was there. But the stones remembered, and so did the roots beneath the floor. It had been built long ago, long before Tutankhamun was born, long before his father or his father's father, a secret garden, and it was waiting. Tutankhamun found it not through maps or plans, but by following something unseen. One evening, after a rainstorm had passed, he wandered through the cool halls alone. He was not searching, not really, but there was a feeling in the air, a soft tug behind the heart, like a memory calling from far away. He passed the storage rooms, the faded storerooms, a broken statue leaning sideways, and then behind a tapestry of blue lotus blooms, he found a narrow staircase, carved from limestone, worn smooth, dusty, as if it hadn't been touched in hundreds of years. And yet, the air that rose from below smelled of green. Step by step, Tutankhamun followed the scent. It was not the sharp green of reeds or wet grass. It was softer, wilder, like jasmine, like time. At the bottom of the stair, a wooden door, swollen by age, waited. He pushed gently. Its side open, and there it was. A garden underneath the palace. Not a garden of fountains and flags, but one of dreams. Vines climbed the walls, their blossoms glowing faintly in the dim light. Trees with silver bark curved toward an invisible sky. Pale fruit hung from high branches, and flowers opened and closed like breathing. At the center stood a pool, still round, and as clear as polished glass. Tutankhamun stepped forward, his heart slowing to match the hush. He looked into the pool, and there he saw something impossible. Not his reflection, but his memories. One by one, soft and slow, they drifted across the water. The moment he first held the crook and flail, the taste of honey bread at his 7th birthday, Ankhesenamun's laugh when she dropped pomegranate seeds into his lap, and more. Moments he had forgotten. A servant's smile, a bird on the windowsill, the way sunlight once warmed his toes in winter. The garden was not made of soil and seed. It was made of remembrance. And when he turned, he saw the walls blooming, not with plants, but with scenes from lives before his, other kings, other children, mothers and sons, scribes and dancers, farmers and builders, all woven into leaves, petals, and fruit. 1,000 lives pressed into peace. He sat beside the pool and whispered, "Why have you waited for me?" And though no voice answered, the garden replied, not with sound, but with the hush of growing things. Because you are ready now to know that nothing is lost, that every moment, no matter how small, lives here, in the garden of forever. Tutankhamun stayed until the stars turned overhead. He picked a single blossom white with a purple center and tucked it behind his ear. Then he climbed the stairs, the scent of the garden trailing behind him like a lullaby. And though he never told anyone where the garden lay, he visited often, not to take anything, but to remember, to sit in the stillness, to feel how wide time really was, and to know, deep in his heart, that forever isn't far away. It's just beneath the palace, or beneath a breath, or beneath a dream. The stars always whispered to Tutankhamun. They shimmered like the jewels of Ra, pinned to the fabric of the sky by hands no one could see. But on one very special night, they did not whisper, they watched. Because on that night, the moon did something it was never meant to do. It multiplied. The palace was quiet. The oil lamps had been blown out, and even the cats had curled into the soft folds of shadow. Tutankhamun stood on his rooftop terrace, his robe wrapped loosely around his shoulders, his eyes turned upward. The moon had just risen round, pale and golden. But behind it came another, almost identical, softer, dimmer, like a twin stepping shyly into view. The sky seemed to hold its breath. Ankhesenamun joined him, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. She gasped softly. "There are two," she whispered. Tutankhamun nodded. "Two moons, and only one sky." They stood side by side, not speaking, not needing to, because the air itself seemed to lean forward, as if waiting for something to begin. Down below, priests stirred from sleep. Astronomers climbed towers with trembling hands. Scrolls were unrolled. Old prophecies murmured under breath. But Tutankhamun remained still. He felt no fear, only a pull, as if the moon was calling to him, not with voice or light, but with a question. Which one is real? He closed his eyes, and suddenly he was not on the rooftop. He stood in a wide field of silver sand, barefoot, wrapped in moonlight. Above him, the two moons, They drifted slowly across the sky, like swans across a pond. And from behind one of them, a figure stepped forth, not a man, not a god, something in between. His robe shimmered like stardust. His eyes held centuries. He spoke in a voice like wind on stone. Young king, every ruler is asked one question in his time. Tonight, it is your turn. Tutankhamun bowed his head. What is the question? The moon being smiled. When the world gives you two lights, which will you follow? Tutankhamun looked up at the moons. One was brighter, bold, clear. The other was softer, quieter, almost hidden. He thought of his life, the choices, the voices of advisors, the weight of the crown. And then he thought of Ankhesenamun's laughter, of Seneb's quiet paintings, of the wind in the garden, of the lion beneath the throne, and he knew. He turned to the softer moon. I will follow the one that speaks in silence, he said, the one that lights without blinding. The moon being nodded, pleased. Then you are not only a king, you are a seer of stillness. The world shimmered. And when Tutankhamun opened his eyes, he was back on the rooftop. The sky was just beginning to pale with the blush of dawn. Only one moon remained now, soft and steady. And Khisenamun was still beside him, her hand in his. Did you dream? She asked. No, he said gently. I listened. The next morning, the scribes tried to explain the two moons. They said it was a trick of the stars, a reflection in the sky, a rare occurrence not seen for hundreds of years. Tutankhamun only nodded. He didn't correct them, because it hadn't been a trick. It had been a question, and he had answered it with his heart. That night, before sleep wrapped the world in silver, Tutankhamun looked to the sky once more. The moon was alone again, but not lonely, and neither was he. In the heart of the palace, beneath a floor no one walked on anymore, there was a chamber so still, so secret, that even time seemed to tiptoe past it. It was called the Room of Stone Faces. No one visited, no one cleaned it, no one spoke of it. It had been forgotten, like a dream left behind in the folds of a morning pillow. But one evening, after a quiet day full of clouds and soft thoughts, Tutankhamun found himself drawn to a hallway he had never walked before. There was no reason, no map, no message, only the feeling that something was waiting to be seen. He walked with bare feet. The stone floor felt cool and smooth beneath him, like the surface of a calm river. The torches flickered low. The air was scented with dust and ancient breath. He passed through an archway, nearly swallowed by shadow, ducked beneath a hanging tapestry, frayed at the corners, and stepped into the chamber. It was wide, quiet, filled with faces, statues, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, each carved in stones, some small, some tall, some sitting cross-legged, others standing straight and proud. They looked like kings, queens, gods, dancers, children, all silent, all still. Yet, as Tutankhamun stood there, the silence did not feel empty. It felt watchful. He walked slowly between them. Their eyes carved from obsidian quartz or jade seemed to follow gently, not with judgment, but with a deep, ancient kindness. Each statue had its own story, but none could speak it aloud. So Tutankhamun did something unusual. He spoke to them. He stopped in front of a small statue of a boy, his hands pressed together in prayer. I know what it feels like, Tutankhamun whispered, to be young and silent in a room of voices. The statue did not move, but in its stillness there was a reply, not in words, but in warmth. He moved to a tall figure with a lion's head. I sometimes feel I am two people, he said softly. A boy and a king. The lion-faced statue stood calm and patient, as if to say, "You are not two. You are both. Always." And then he found a statue of a queen with a crown of stars. Her lips were slightly parted, as though caught mid-song. "I miss my mother," he said. The statue did not change, but he felt something in his chest soften, a loosening, a gentle sigh inside the soul. He wandered the room, talking in murmurs and hushes, as though the stone could feel his breath, and perhaps it could, because something began to happen, not to the statues, but to him. He began to feel lighter, more real, as though each word spoken aloud took a little weight off his heart, and the silence returned not as loneliness, but as peace. Eventually, he sat down cross-legged on the floor. He closed his eyes. Around him, the statues stood still, yet he felt surrounded by old friends, not people who demanded anything, not advisors or priests or watchers, just quiet shapes that understood. "You don't need to speak to be heard," the room seemed to say. "You don't need to move to matter." And Kasanaman found him there. Later that night, she didn't ask why he was sitting in a forgotten hall, surrounded by faces of stone. She simply sat beside him, and together, in silence, they listened to the stillness. From then on, when Tutankhamun felt too full of questions, or too quiet for the noise of court, he would return to the room of stone faces, not to talk, not always, sometimes just to be. Because he had learned something gentle and true. Even stone can hold stories, even silence can reply, and sometimes being heard means listening first. One night, under a sky brushed with stars like powdered silver, Tutankhamun had a dream. It was not loud. It did not thunder like the gods, or flash like lightning. It began with a feather, light, white, soft as a sigh. It floated down from the sky, spinning slowly, gently, as if time itself had paused just to watch it fall. In the dream, Tutankhamun stood in a great hall. It was quiet, so quiet he could hear his own heart. The walls were made of gold and stone, etched with pictures that seemed to move when he blinked, lions walking, ankhs glowing, rivers flowing in silence. At the far end of the hall stood a tall scale, and beside it, a woman with wings. She did not speak. She did not need to. He knew her name without hearing it. Mat, goddess of truth, guardian of balance. She stepped aside, and the scale shimmered into life. On one side, she placed the feather. It barely moved the dish, so light it might as well have been moonlight caught on the wind. And on the other side, she looked at Tutankhamun. "Place your heart," the silence said. He hesitated. "How can I take it out?" he asked, his voice no louder than a breath. Matt said nothing, but the scale waited. And then his chest felt warm. A soft glow rose from within. His heart lifted out of him, not with pain, not with fear, but with peace. It floated like a flame and settled into the other dish. The scale moved. Tutankhamun watched. The feather and the heart swayed back and forth, up and down, light then lighter. He thought of many things, the secrets he had kept, the times he had been brave, the nights he had doubted, the mornings he had laughed. He thought of the kindness he had given, and the kindness he had wished he'd given more of. And as he watched, he whispered to himself, "I tried." At last, the scale stilled. The heart and the feather rested in perfect balance, neither heavier, neither lighter, equal. Mat bowed her head once, not in approval, not in judgment, but in recognition. "You carry truth gently," the silence said. "That is enough." And then the hall began to fade. The golden walls softened into clouds. The scale shimmered into starlight, and the feather rose once more, drifting up, up into the dreaming sky. Tutankhamun woke with the first light of dawn. He felt no fear, no confusion, just calm. He turned to Ankhesenamun beside him, still sleeping, her breath soft and even. He touched his chest. His heart was still there, still beating, but it felt somehow lighter, not empty, just clear, like a pool with no ripples, like a sky after the rain. He rose quietly and walked to the window. The morning wind curled around him like a soft scarf, and there, floating down from nowhere, he saw a single feather, white, still perfect. He caught it in his palm and smiled. From that day on, Tutankhamun kept a feather beside his bed, not to remind him of judgment, but of gentleness, the kind of truth that lives in kindness, in quiet courage, in small acts unseen, the kind that makes a heart as light as a whisper on the wind. Each morning, the sun rose faithfully over the Nile. It painted the river in gold, kissed the palms with honey, and made the lotus flowers stretch their sleepy petals wide. To most, it was just another dawn, a part of the rhythm. But Tutankhamun had begun to wonder, was the sun always the same, or did it carry secrets hidden in its warmth and shine? One morning, long before the palace stirred, Tutankhamun rose from his bed, wrapped in a soft white robe, and slipped quietly from his chambers. He told no one where he was going, not even Ankhesenamun. He carried nothing but a small piece of bread and a question in his heart. Does the sun have a secret name? The boy king walked through the garden, where the dew still glittered on the leaves like tiny sleeping stars. He passed the fig trees and the fish ponds, nodding to the ibis birds as they preened in silence. He walked out past the palace walls, barefoot on the cool earth, heading toward the hills that watched over Thebes. The sky was a soft purple, the stars slowly bowing away, and still the sun had not yet risen. He climbed to a quiet ledge, just high enough to see the river bend like a ribbon in the valley below. There he waited, not with impatience, not with words, just breath and stillness. And finally, soft, the edge of the sun appeared. It was not fiery, not yet. It was shy, warm and curious, as if it too was waking from a dream. And then something strange happened. Tutankhamun closed his eyes, and he heard it. Not a voice, but a name, not in language, but in feeling. The kind of name that can't be written, can't be spoken, but known deep in the chest, where truth and quiet things live. It wrapped around him gently, like light made of memory, a name not for the world, but for those who listen. The name of the sun in that moment was not Ra or Aten. It was something softer, something only the morning knew. He understood it without needing to say it. And then, as the light grew stronger, the name faded, not lost, just hidden again, like a pearl tucked back into the shell of the sky. Tutankhamun opened his eyes. The sun was rising now, bold and bright, spilling its golden crown over the hills. Birds began to sing. The city below stretched and yawned awake, and he smiled. He walked back to the palace slowly, his heart full of something he couldn't quite explain. Not power, not knowledge, but knowing, a quiet knowing, that some things do not need to be owned, or shouted, or proved. Some things are gifts, soft ones. That visit when the world is still and listening. That evening, as the sun set behind the columns of the palace, Tutankhamun sat with Ankhesenamun. He held her hand and said, "Did you know the sun has more than one name?" She smiled. "Oh, what are they?" He looked at her and whispered, I only remember how they felt. And she nodded, understanding him without needing anything more. From that day on, Tutankhamun woke early now and then, just to greet the sun before anyone else. He never wrote down what he heard, never told the priests, never spoke the secret names aloud, because he had learned some truths are not for scrolls, some names are for hearts, and the sun, in its golden silence, was always happy to tell him one more. The Nile was always moving. By day it shimmered in gold, by night it whispered in silver. It carried fish and boats and reflections. It carried reeds and stories and time itself. But beneath the Nile, deep under the surface, where light did not go and voices turned soft as silk, there was another river, one that few had seen, and one that, one night, came to visit Tutankhamun in a dream. He had fallen asleep, listening to the soft splash of water outside his window. The palace walls could not keep out the Nile's song, and in that dreamy space between waking and sleep, he heard a voice like water on stone. Come below. The river has more than one current, and before he knew it, he was standing barefoot at the Nile's edge, not in the waking world, but in a dream world. The sky above was indigo velvet. The stars blinked slowly, like sleepy eyes. He stepped into the water, and instead of sinking, he floated downward, not like falling, but like being gently carried in a cradle made of light. Below the Nile, there was no darkness, only blue, soft, deep blue. Fish swam past him like thoughts. Plants waved like gentle hands, and the current, it moved sideways, not forward, not backward, but inward, as if the river was leading him not through the world, but through memory. He passed through scenes carved from dreams. There was his mother's laugh, clear as a bell made of sunshine. There was his first lion cub, blinking up at him with golden eyes. There was the time he got lost in the garden and cried, and the gardener had carried him on his back like a baby king while the stars listened kindly. Each moment swirled past him, not to hold on to, but to feel. And then he came to a quiet bend in the river where the water slowed to a hush. A small boat waited there. In it sat an old man with skin like driftwood and eyes like the moon. He smiled at Tutankhamun. You have come far for someone so young. Tutankhamun bowed slightly. I followed the current. The man nodded. All rivers remember. Few rulers listen. He held out something wrapped in cloth. Tutankhamun unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a small jar, sealed with wax, cool to the touch. What is it? The boy king asked. The old man's eyes twinkled. It is a piece of yourself, one that floated away once. You're ready to carry it again. Tutankhamun held the jar to his chest. He felt it glow, not hot, just whole. The river began to lift him, as if it knew he had found what he came for. The water turned light again. The memories faded into bubbles and mist. He rose slowly, the way the sun rises behind the hills. And then he was back, in his bed, in his room, in the world of waking. The Nile still whispered beyond his window. But now he heard two songs, one above, one below. In the morning, he told Ankhesenamun, I dreamed of the river beneath the river. She touched his arm gently. What did you find there? He held his hand over his chest. Something I had forgotten belonged to me. From then on, Tutankhamun listened differently, to water, to wind, to memory, because he knew there is always more flowing beneath what we see. There are stories in silence, and sometimes we must drift inward to come back more complete. The crown of Egypt was made of gold. It shimmered like the desert at noon. It sparkled with lapis and turquoise, and coiled with a serpent of protection. It was beautiful, but it was also heavy. Too heavy for a boy. Too heavy for even a man, sometimes. And yet, each morning, not because others expected it, but because he had begun to wonder, what if a crown could be light? One evening, after a long day of scrolls, ceremonies, and sitting very still while priests chanted things he barely understood, Tutankhamun removed his crown and set it down. He looked at it as one might look at a mountain. Golden, distant, quiet. He sat beside it on the floor, cross-legged and thoughtful. Ankhis joined him. Neither spoke for a while. Then he said, "Does a crown have to weigh so much?" She smiled. "Maybe it depends on how it's worn." That night, Tutankhamun dreamed again. In the dream, he stood in a field of tall papyrus. The sky above was full of floating stars, but they didn't blink, they hummed. A gentle breeze wrapped around him like a lullaby, and there, growing in the middle of the field, was a crown, not made of gold, not hard or heavy, but woven from reeds, lotus flowers, and threads of dawn. It glowed softly, not with jewels, but with stillness. He picked it up and placed it on his head. It didn't press down. It didn't make his neck ache. Instead, it sat there quietly, like a bird resting in a tree, light as a whisper. In the dream, voices came to him. A true crown is not worn with the head. It is worn with the heart. It is not for commanding, but for caring. He walked through the dream fields, greeting invisible people, hearing laughter, seeing joy ripple through the reeds like water. And all the while, the soft crown stayed with him, not as a symbol of rule, but as a reminder, you are here too. Carry, not to control. He awoke with the dawn. This time, he did not reach for the golden crown immediately. He rose slowly. He stepped into the garden barefoot. Let the dew kiss his toes. He watched a bee collect nectar from a hibiscus bloom. He watched a cat sleep curled beneath a fig tree, and he whispered, "I will wear the crown like sunlight wears the morning." When he returned to the throne room, he took the crown in his hands. He bowed to it. He wore the reed crown from his dream. And strangely, the gold felt lighter. From that day forward, Tutankhamun ruled differently. He smiled more often. He asked questions instead of giving commands. He listened longer before speaking. He laughed with children and played with their pet monkeys. He gave food to the workers before the feast reached the nobles. He still wore the crown, but not as armor, as a promise to be soft in strength, to lead with gentleness, to make space for others to shine. Enki watched him one morning as he helped a blind servant feel the carvings on a column, his voice full of description and wonder. She leaned to his advisor and whispered, "The crown is getting lighter." And the advisor, old and wise, smiled back. "That's because he is learning how to carry it." And so, Tutankhamun became the boy who wore the heaviest crown with the lightest heart, not because he wanted to be remembered, but because he wanted to care. Long ago, before the pyramids pointed to the sky, and before the first names were carved into stone, there was a temple hidden in the heart of the desert. It was not made of bricks, not built by hammers, not guarded by walls. It was shaped by wind, whispered into being, worn by breath and breeze, etched by time and air. The people forgot its name. Even the priests let it fade from their scrolls, but the desert never forgot, and neither did the wind. One afternoon, as Tutankhamun sat quietly in the palace garden, a breeze brushed his face. Not a normal breeze. A feeling, it danced through the reeds. It teased the edge of his linen robe, and it seemed to say, "Come where silence speaks." That night, the boy king set out with only a small camel caravan. No trumpets, no guards in gold, just Ankhesenamen to guides and the stars. They traveled beyond the city, past the hills, past the places where even the sand had forgotten its name. And then, one night, the wind shifted. It circled them gently, swirling the sand into soft spirals, as if drawing invisible symbols in the air. One of the guides stopped and whispered, "We're close." They arrived at dawn. There were no columns, no roof, no gates, just open air between tall sandstone spires, carved by the desert wind into soft, sweeping shapes. And yet, Tutankhamun knew it was a temple. He felt it in his chest, like a drumbeat just beneath the ribs. The wind began to blow, harsh, not loud, but steady. Ancient dot, it filled the space with a hush that was not empty, but full. And then, like a dream, the wind began to speak, not in words, in memories. The air rippled with sounds, laughter of forgotten children, prayers spoken in lost tongues, a lullaby hummed by someone thousands of years ago. Tutankhamun closed his eyes. The wind swirled around him, through him, and suddenly he knew this temple had never been made for eyes. It had been made for ears and hearts, and those who understood that stillness is not the same as silence. It was built not to be seen, but to be felt. A voice in the wind curled around him. "Do you hear what others forget? Do you listen without needing to answer? Then you carry the wind in your soul." He did not answer. He didn't need to. He simply stood, arms open, and let the wind pass through him like a river through. Reeds later, he found a stone buried in the sand. It was smooth, unmarked, except for one tiny symbol, carved so lightly he almost missed it. It was the feather of Mat, the symbol of truth, balance, and breath. He held it close to his heart. Ankhesenamen asked, "What is this place?" He smiled gently. "A temple with no doors, a voice with no mouth, a truth with no sound." They returned to Thebes, but the wind came with them, not loud, not seen dot, but in the way Tutankhamun paused before speaking, in the way he listened when others didn't, in the way he left spaces for people to simply be. And sometimes, when he sat quietly in the garden, he would feel the breeze circle him again, soft as a lullaby, and he would whisper, "I remember." Night came gently to Thebes. It crept like velvet over the hills, kissed the tops of palms, and spilled across the Nile like dark honey. The palace lamps flickered. The crickets began their tiny songs. And in the garden, Tutankhamun sat with his back against a date tree, gazing up at the stars. He had always loved the sky. It never asked anything of him. It never bowed. It simply shone. But tonight, something felt different. The stars were brighter, somehow clearer, like they had something to say. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathed in the warm night air, and when he opened them, the stars had moved, not far, not with force, just slightly like dancers, shifting their feet in the middle of a dream, and now they formed shapes. He saw a lion first, its mane curled like fire, round and glowing, a boat, long and curved like a smile, carried a single figure who looked just like him. But the boat wasn't floating on water. It was sailing on the stars. He blinked, wondering if he had fallen asleep. But the stars held steady. They glowed with meaning, with memory, with magic. And in that moment, he understood. The stars were painting his story, not just his crown, not just his name, but the quiet things, the kindnesses, the dreams, the choices made when no one was watching. A voice rose within him, not from the sky, from somewhere deeper. What we do in the day is written in the night, not to be praised, but to be remembered. Anchizanomen joined him beneath the tree. She looked up and gasped softly. "Do you see them too?" he asked. She nodded. "I see the lion and the scarab, and you." He looked over at her, eyes wide with wonder. "They're painting my journey." She smiled. "Heart." They lay back on the cool earth, side by side, watching the sky continue its slow, beautiful dance. And all around them, the stars moved with purpose. Some twinkled like laughter, others blinked like blinking eyes. Some pulsed like a heartbeat. The sky was alive, and Tutankhamun felt smaller than he'd ever felt, but not in a frightening way, in a way that made him feel. He looked up one last time. He placed his hand on his chest and whispered, "Thank you, sky. I will try to make my story a gentle one." And in the dark above, a new star appeared, small, soft, just to the left of the lion's paw. From that night on, Tutankhamun walked differently, not as one trying to be seen, but as one knowing he was already part of the sky. And when others asked him why he sometimes smiled for no reason at the moon or the stars, he would only say, "They're still painting." In the palace courtyard, where sun warmed the stones and fig trees whispered with shade. Tutankhamun noticed something curious. A scarab beetle, shiny and small, crawling slowly near the edge of the lily pond. Its back gleamed like polished obsidian, and its legs moved with quiet purpose. Not hurried, not afraid, just sure. He bent down to watch it. The scarab paused, as if it saw him too. Then, very deliberately, it turned and began to walk away. Tutankhamun followed. It was not a chase, not really, more like a silent invitation. The scarab led him along warm stone paths, through the garden gate, and into the quiet of the old archive room. Scrolls lined the walls like sleeping thoughts. Dust floated through the golden light. The beetle stopped beside a low shelf. It tapped the stone 3 times with one tiny leg. Tap, tap, tap. Tutankhamun knelt down. He ran his fingers along the shelf's edge until he found a small crack, a seam. He pushed gently. Click. A drawer he had never seen before slid open. Inside was a single stone tablet, small enough to fit in his palm. Carved into it was a scarab with wings spread wide, and beneath it a line of hieroglyphs. He read them slowly. "What is small may carry the sun. What is soft may move the world. Transformation is quiet but real." He sat there, a long time, holding the tablet, watching the scarab crawl away once more. He didn't stop it. He didn't follow. He simply watched and listened to the message still echoing in his chest. Later that night, he lay in bed beneath the soft linen sheets, his room filled with the cool hush of evening. He thought of the scarab, of its steady steps, of its ancient magic. In Egypt, the scarab was sacred, the symbol of the rising sun, of rebirth, of becoming. And now he understood why, in the morning, he placed the stone tablet on his desk, not for others to see, but so he would remember that a king need not roar like a lion. He could also move like a beetle, quiet, steady, true. The days that followed were ordinary, meetings, prayers, walks along the Nile. But something in Tutankhamun had shifted, not loudly, but deeply. He began to pay more attention to little things, the shape of a servant's smile, the way sand shifted beneath his sandals, the way Ankhesenamon's braid curled slightly at the end. He became gentler, not because he was weak, but because he was learning how softness holds strength. One afternoon, he carved a small scarab from ivory and gave it to a child who had dropped her doll in the marketplace. He told her, "This beetle reminds us that small things can do great things," and she smiled with all her teeth and hugged it close. That night, as the moon rose slow and round, Tutankhamun stood at his window. He whispered into the wind, "Thank you, little one. I will walk with quieter strength." And far below, in the garden shadows, a single scarab moved forward, carrying the light in its silence. Past the kitchens, beyond the columns, and behind a crumbling stone wall, there was a door no one used anymore. It was old. Its hinges creaked like a yawn. Vines curled around its frame like sleeping snakes. Tutankhamun had passed it many times, but one quiet morning when the wind was slow and the air smelled of new papyrus, he stopped. He placed his hand on the door. It was warm, waiting. He pushed it open. The space beyond was once a garden. He could tell by the shape of it. Low stone borders, a dry basin for water, cracked paths peeking through the weeds. But now it was wild, overgrown, forgotten. Tall grass danced in the breeze. Old fig trees stretched like aching limbs. Even the lotus pond was only a muddy shadow of what it had been. Most would have turned away. But Tutankhamun stepped forward. He did not call the gardeners. He did not order servants to clear it. Instead, he knelt down. With his own fingers, he began to pull away dead leaves, lift broken branches, and gently pat the dry soil. Each morning, he returned. Sometimes Ankhesenamun joined him, and they worked side by side in soft silence. Sometimes a cat followed them in, curling in a patch of sun. Sometimes a bird perched on a fig branch and sang a few quiet notes. The garden listened day by day. Life returned. The earth, once dry, began to soften with water and care. Lotus seeds, long asleep, yawned open under the surface of the pond. Fig trees dropped ripe fruit again, and bees, small, golden, humming, returned to dance between the blossoms. No trumpets played. No scrolls were written, but the garden, in its quiet way, was blooming. One morning, a small boy from the palace kitchen peeked through the garden gate. He watched Tutankhamun carefully place a new lily into the pond's edge. The boy asked, shyly, "Why does a king plant flowers?" Tutankhamun looked up and smiled. "Because flowers don't care about crowns. They only care about time and love." Soon word spread, not loudly, but softly, like petals on water, and others began to visit. A lonely scribe came to sit beneath the fig tree and write poems. A tired guard came to rest on a bench and nap beneath the breeze. A weaver brought her basket and sang lullabies to herself. While threading papyrus, the garden became something more than a garden. It became a home for quiet things. One day, Tutankhamun placed a single stone tablet by the entrance. On it, he had carved, "Here, nothing is rushed. Here, nothing is perfect. But here, everything is growing." In the evenings, when the stars began to blink, Tutankhamun would sit by the pond and listen to the frogs. He would watch the moon's reflection shimmer on the water, and he would remember that even kings need quiet places where the only sounds are wind and frogs and the soft sigh of the world beginning again. And so, the forgotten garden became the heart of the palace. Not because it was grand, but because it was still, and in its stillness it reminded all who entered gentleness grows things too. The sun had just finished yawning across the Nile when Tutankhamun first heard it, a sound not loud, not clear, but there it came from the far edge of the palace courtyard, near the sandstone steps where the cats liked to nap, a low hum, a breath beneath the earth, soft as thread, thin as silk, but steady like a heartbeat in the sand. He paused, listened. The guards nearby heard nothing. Even Ankhesenamun tilted her head, then shook it gently. But Tutankhamun, he heard it. That night he returned alone, carrying only a small oil lamp and a heart full of questions. He knelt beside the sandstone step, pressed his ear close to the warm ground, and there it was again. Hum 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 dash, hum dash, who dash, who dot, like a song that had forgotten its words, but remembered its feeling. He marked the spot with a pebble, and for the next 7 nights, he came back each time closer, each time listening longer, until, at last, he found it, a circle of stone beneath the soil, covered in fine sand and tiny wildflowers. When he brushed the sand away, he found a small carving, a spiral, etched so faintly it looked like wind had drawn it. He pressed gently, clicked, the stone shifted, and a thin crack opened in the ground. He called no one, no torches, no trumpets, only Ankhesenamun and his old friend Amunrad the scribe. Together they descended the narrow stair into the whispering chamber. The room was not large, its ceiling was low, its walls were curved like a shell, and in the center sat a single object, a bowl made of crystal, resting on a dais of smooth black stone. Nothing else, no gold, no paintings, no tombs, only quiet, and the hum. It came from the bowl, not music, not wind, but a deep, soft vibration, like the earth itself was, singing something so old, even time had grown shy. Amrid whispered, "I've read of this, the bowl of breath. It was said to hold the memory of sound, not words, but feeling, like a dream, caught forever." Tutankhamun stepped closer. He didn't touch it. He only closed his eyes and listened. Suddenly, he was a child again, listening to his mother's lullaby, her voice humming through the air like perfume. He was in the garden, watching a bee spin between lilies. The beat of its wings was the same hum. He was floating on the Nile, a breeze on his face, the boat creaking gently, a rhythm, low and calm. He opened his eyes. "It's everything," he said. "It's all the quiet things we forget to notice." He didn't take the bowl from its place. He left it right where it had hummed for centuries. Instead, he sealed the chamber gently and marked it with only a small stone spiral on the floor above, a secret, not hidden, just waiting to be found by someone who truly listens. And from that day on, Tutankhamun did something new. When someone spoke, he waited a moment longer than needed before replying. When birds chirped outside his window, he paused to hear the pattern. When the wind moved through the papyrus scrolls, he listened for their language, because he had learned something deep. Not all wisdom is loud. Not all lessons are spoken. Some truths hum. It began with a single flame, a tiny light, cupped in the hollow of Tutankhamun's palm. As the sun dipped behind the western cliffs of Thebes and the world leaned softly into night, he stood at the highest terrace of the palace, looking out over the city, watching shadows stretch long and gentle across the Nile. Beside him stood Enkidu, her fingers wrapped around a small clay lamp. It was the festival of lamps, a night meant for memory, for wishes, for glowing hearts. Every household in Thebes was given one oil lamp, each shaped with care by potters from the river villages. Some had lotus petals carved along their sides. Others held the faces of cats or falcons or tiny stars. The rule was simple: light your lamp and place it somewhere it can be seen, so your warmth may reach another, even if you never meet. Tutankhamun loved this night more than all others, not for its ceremony, not for the offerings or the incense, but because of what it meant. 1,000 lamps, 1,000 hopes, all flickering toward one another through the quiet hush of dark. He lit his lamp first. The flame was soft, almost shy, but it glowed bravely against the wind. Then Enkidu lit hers, then the royal guards, then the kitchen staff, then the scribes, then the stable boys. One by one, the palace began to glow from within like a living lantern. Down in the streets, families placed their lamps on windowsills and balconies. Some floated them on the river in little reed boats. Others climbed rooftops and held their lights up to the stars. Children giggled as the flames danced. Grandmothers hummed old songs that matched the flicker. And far across the city, strangers smiled at each other by the light of a shared glow. Tutankhamun watched it all in silence. He imagined each lamp holding a wish: a girl hoping her brother would come home safely, a boy wishing his sick mother would laugh again, a weaver praying the rain would come soon, a servant hoping someone remembered his name, a flame for each dot, warm, small, but real. And then he had an idea. He turned to the palace scribe. "Let us send 1,000 lamps to the furthest villages," he said, "places too poor to have oil or clay. Let every child light something tonight, even if it is only a tiny flame on a leaf." The scribe bowed, and messengers were sent by donkey, by boat, by foot, and by midnight. Lamps were glowing in every corner of Egypt. The Nile glittered like spilled gold. The desert edge sparkled. Even the palm groves looked as if the stars had come down to visit. People called it the night the world was not alone. Tutankhamun and Enkidu sat hand in hand, their feet bare on the cool stone of the terrace. Below them, Egypt pulsed gently with light. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You've made the world warmer," she whispered. He smiled, a little shy. "It wasn't me," he said. "It was them. I just reminded them of what they already carried." Later, as the lamps began to burn low, and the moon glowed full and quiet, Tutankhamun closed his eyes, and in his dreams he saw every lamp still glowing, not just in clay, but in the hearts of the people who had lit them, a warmth that would not die with the wick, a hope that would outlive the night. And far away, in a silent desert village, A child, who had never seen the king, held her tiny leaf lamp in the dark, and whispered, "Thank you, whoever you are." And the wind carried her words, as gently as a lullaby, all the way to the royal terrace, and Tutankhamun, still half dreaming, smiled in his sleep. Before the stars blinked good morning, before the birds rustled their wings, and before the boats creaked on the river, Tutankhamun rose. He wrapped himself in a simple white robe, no jewels, no crown, only silence. He stepped barefoot from the palace, down through the gardens, past the sleeping date palms, and walked to the river bank. The Nile was still, dark, endless, like a great, breathing hush. He sat on the same worn stone his father had once sat upon, and perhaps his father before that, and his father before that. The Nile had watched them all, and still it flowed, not faster, not slower, just true. He had loved the Nile all his life as a boy. He would drop pebbles into it and try to guess where they would land. As a teenager, he would sail its currents, pretending the wind was his ally, and the waves his whispers. As a king, he had poured libations, offered incense, given thanks. But today felt different. Today, the Nile was waiting. He leaned closer. The water lapped gently at the shore, a rhythm older than time. And then he heard it, a sound not of water, but of word, so faint, so featherlight, he thought it might be his own breath. But it wasn, single quotes. It was the Nile. Sahari, just one word, soft as dusk, Sahari. He listened again. It came with the ripples, with the breeze, with the quiet ache of the world turning. He closed his eyes and let the name enter him, like a river enters the sea. Sahari, she who carries all and holds none. She who remembers and releases. She who flows, even through sorrow. The Nile was speaking, not in words, but in knowing, and Tutankhamun understood. His heart ached, not with sadness, but with a kind of sacred stillness. The Nile was not just a river, it was a teacher, a mother, a memory. It had carried pharaohs, peasants, papyrus, and prayers, and yet it never clung. It always let go. And so, in that moment, Tutankhamun whispered back, "Sahari, thank you, not for riches, not for power, but for the lesson that a life well lived is like a river, always flowing, always offering, never grasping." The sun began to rise, slow, golden, quiet. Light touched the Nile, and it shimmered like an eye-opening. After a long dream, Tutankhamun stood. He bowed his head not as a king, but as a student, and then, slowly, he turned to walk back to the palace, his robe brushing the morning grass, his steps light, his heart wide. Behind him, the Nile continued to flow. It whispered its name again, just once, Zahari, then fell silent. But he would never forget. The palace was quiet, too quiet for trumpets, too soft for sandals slapping stone. Even the breeze had curled itself to sleep. It was one of those nights when the moon rose without asking permission, and the stars showed up early, as if they had something important to say. Tutankhamun couldn't sleep, not from worry, not from fear, but from a feeling, a soft tug, like a memory he hadn't made yet, pulling him gently toward the heavens. He slipped from his bed, stepped out into the royal courtyard, and looked up. The sky above Thebes was wide and velvet black. The stars blinked like they knew secrets. He had studied the stars as a boy. The astronomer priests had shown him how to track their patterns, how to name their clusters. how to find Osiris and Isis among the constellations. But tonight, he wasn't looking for knowledge. He was listening. He lay down on a cool slab of stone. The stars stretched above him, not far, not distant, like kind friends leaning in to tell a bedtime story. He whispered softly, "I'm not afraid, but I feel something coming." One star shimmered a little more brightly than the rest. It pulsed gently. Tutankhamun blinked once, and then he saw it, not with his eyes, but with something deeper, a quiet vision laid out in the night like a soft scroll. He saw his people, not in palaces, but in fields, tending crops, laughing with their children, carving fish from wood, baking bread over shared fires. He saw his name, Tutankhamun, drift through the ages, like pollen on the wind. He saw strangers long after his time, brushing dust from golden artifacts, studying his sandals, marveling at his smile, whispering he was just a boy. He saw children listening to stories about him at bedtime, under stars, in places he would never know, and he smiled. The stars said nothing, but their silence spoke volumes. "You are not forever," they seemed to say, "but your kindness is Pemmenster. You will fade, but your gentleness will ripple on through stories, through memory, through love." Tutankhamun placed a hand on his chest, where his heart beat slowly, softly. He didn't need to be remembered for his crown. He only hoped to be remembered for his light, even if it was small, even if it was like a single star dot, still shining, still there. As the night deepened, he felt sleep returning, creeping in like mist. He whispered to the stars one last time, "Thank you for listening to me." And in the hush between breaths, he imagined them answering back, "We always were." He rose, not to return to bed, but to climb to the very top of the palace, where the wind was crisp and the sky kissed the earth. He stood beneath the cosmos, a boy wrapped in linen, a king cloaked in wonder. And as the Nile shimmered below and the heavens shimmered above, Tutankhamun did what he always did best. He listened. The dream began with a golden feather. It floated down through a ceilingless sky, drifting like a leaf in slow motion. No breeze, no bird, just the feather falling, falling, until it touched his hand. Tutankhamun reached for it in sleep, and when his fingers closed around the dream, he felt warmth, like sunlight and memory, all at once. Then a voice, not loud, not even speaking, just present. "Come below," it said. "There is more to see." He awoke at dawn, the dream still clinging to his skin like mist. He rose quietly and walked alone to the west wing of the palace, to the oldest corridor, where stone lions guarded empty halls. He'd passed it 100 times before, but today the air smelled different, like rain on dry rock, like memory waking up. There was a crack in the wall, thin, easy to miss, but his dream had shown it. He pressed his palm against it, and the stone gave a soft groan. Click, a panel shifted. A breeze, musty and dry, spilled out. Behind it, stairs. He lit a small lamp and descended. The sandstone steps were worn smooth, curved slightly to the left, as if they'd been walked by many feet over many years. He counted softly as he went. 1, 2, 3. But by 12, he stopped counting. Not because he lost track, but because time itself had gone quiet. The chamber at the bottom was not large, but it breathed, as if it had been waiting just for this moment. The air shimmered faintly, like heat, like memory. Tutankhamun held up his lamp and gasped, asterisk, the walls were covered in paintings, not like the ones in the tombs, bright with gold and gods. These were softer, older, etched with a gentler hand. There were circles that turned into suns, spirals that flowed into waves, eyes drawn with tears falling up. One wall showed a figure walking backward, smiling as he disappeared into a pool of stars. Another showed hands reaching out not to grasp, but to let go. Then he saw himself, not exactly, but close, a boy king, wearing no crown, just a small amulet of turquoise, and a white robe that fluttered like mist. He stood between two doors, one dark as obsidian, one glowing with soft amber light, and between them, a feather, the same feather from his dream. Asterisk, Tutankhamun stepped closer. He didn't need to understand, he only needed to feel. The chamber was showing him something deeper than history. It was showing him how to walk through the world with softness, how to lead with kindness, how to say goodbye and trust that love would carry on. He sat cross-legged in the center of the room, the lamp flickering beside him. He closed his eyes and breathed. Time slowed, then stopped, then flowed again like a river changing course, and in that stillness, Tutankhamun understood something simple and profound. You do not need to last forever to matter forever. He opened his eyes. The walls had faded slightly, as if they were slipping back into sleep. He whispered, "Thank you," and rose. As he climbed the stairs, he didn't feel alone. He felt held, watched, carried, not by gods, not by ancestors, but by the quiet presence of all things kind and true, by dreams that linger, by love that doesn't fade, by feathers that fall just when you're ready to notice them. And above him, the day began, bright, golden, soft, the kind of morning that knows a secret and smiles without saying a word. Asterisk, in the quietest part of the palace garden, past the fountains and fruit trees, behind the papyrus pond, there stood a small, circular pool. No guards watched it. No scribes wrote about it. No nobles wandered near. It was a secret kept only by the breeze. And the boy who had once planted the first seed there, Tutankhamun's garden, his sanctuary, he had come here for years to rest, to think, to breathe. No statues, no ceremonies, just the murmur of frogs, the soft lap of water, and the slow patience of plants learning to bloom. But tonight, the air felt different, almost expectant. The moon was nearly full, casting silver trails across the surface of the pool. The reeds bowed gently, as if greeting an old friend, and there, at the very center, a single lotus bud floated unopened. Tutankhamun knelt beside the water. He remembered planting that lotus years ago. He'd been just a boy, still limping from childhood ailments, still finding his voice. He had tucked the seed beneath the mud with his own fingers, whispered a wish into the earth, then waited, but the lotus had never bloomed until now. He leaned in, watched, waited. The moonlight deepened, the night grew still, and slowly, so slowly, it began. The petals stirred, trembled, unfolded, soft white, with hints of deep purple near the heart. A color not often seen, a color that felt like memory and prayer and promise. The flower opened fully, with no sound at all, and yet it spoke, not in words, in presence. Tutankhamun felt something shift inside him, a stillness settling into place, as If the flower had finished a sentence he'd been trying to say all his life, he reached into the pool and gently cupped the lotus in his hands. He did not pluck it, he simply held it, felt its coolness, its trembling, its trust. Then he whispered, "You waited until the night was quiet enough to listen. You bloomed when no one was watching, and somehow you still knew I'd be here." The lotus did not answer. It didn't need to. Its blooming was enough. He sat beside the pool until the stars wheeled above him, and the first hints of morning colored the sky. When he finally rose, he left the lotus untouched, still floating, still shining. Some things, he knew, were not meant to be carried, only visited, witnessed, loved. As he walked away, he did not look back, not because he didn't care, but because the garden was now inside him. The flower, the silence, the moonlight all folded gently into the heart of the king who had learned to bloom quietly, too. The desert was calling Dot, not with storms, not with heat, but with stillness, that kind of stillness that stretches all the way back to the beginning, where time moves in circles and the wind speaks in soft sighs. Tutankhamun left the city gates, quietly, wearing only linen and a small water jar slung across his shoulder. He didn't need guards, or horses, or horns announcing his name. This was not a journey for the crown. This was a journey for the soul. The sun was low, not rising, not setting, just hanging in the sky like an old golden eye, watching. Tutankhamun walked where the dunes curved gently like sleeping giants. His sandals left no mark. The sand swallowed every step like a secret. He walked not for distance, but for feeling, until at last he saw it, a glint, faint, half buried in the sand. Something small and golden. He knelt down, brushed the grains away slowly, like uncovering a dream. There nestled in the earth was a scarab, not a beetle, but a carved piece of gold, smooth and oval, with tiny etchings across its back, older than him, maybe even older than his kingdom. He turned it over in his hand. There were hieroglyphs beneath it, worn, faded, but still there. He traced them with his finger, and though no voice spoke aloud, he felt the meaning: to pass through the land unseen. With heart unheavy and hands open, he looked up. The desert stretched wide and silent. He felt suddenly very small, but not in a frightening way, more like a grain of sand, not alone, but part of something enormous and ancient, part of a tapestry woven by wind, sun, and time. He closed his eyes, and for a long moment he simply breathed. He let go of names, of duties, of yesterday and tomorrow, just breath, just being. When he opened his eyes again, he pressed the scarab gently into the sand where he had found it. He did not take it. He knew now, some treasures are not meant to be kept. They are meant to be found, held, understood, and returned. He whispered, "Thank you, little one. May your message find the next seeker, too." Then he rose and walked on. The wind picked up, curling around his robe, soft as silk, as if the desert were sighing in approval. By the time he reached the edge of the city again, the sun had slipped behind the cliffs. The sky turned to lavender, and in his heart something had settled. Not an answer, not a lesson, just peace. There was a room Tutankhamun rarely visited. It sat in the back wing of the palace. Had once belonged to Queen Tai, his grandmother, a woman of immense wisdom and quiet power. The room still held her scent, myrrh, sandalwood, and dried lotus petals. Even years after she had passed into the arms of the gods, her presence lingered like a soft shawl draped across the furniture. On this evening, with the sky hanging low and silver, Tutankhamun felt drawn there, not by duty, but by something gentler, something like remembering. He stepped softly across the threshold, as if not to wake the room. Dust floated like light in the air. Slow and unbothered, he passed the shelves where scrolls lay rolled in silk, the wooden chair where she once braided her hair, the bowls that once held dates and honeyed almonds. And then, in the corner of the room, he saw it, a mirror, old but unclouded, round as the moon, polished to near perfection, framed in ebony, wrapped in gold. He knelt before it, not to admire himself, but to see, and oh, what he saw! At first, it showed only his face, a boy grown into a young man, still soft at the eyes, with a crown's invisible weight resting on his brow. But slowly, the image began to shift. The mirror did not show the king, it showed the child, a boy laughing, as he played with a lion cub in the garden, a boy running barefoot across the stone floors, a little too fast, falling, getting up with a grin. It showed his first taste of pomegranate, his first night in the palace, the way he clutched his blanket under the stars and whispered, "Will they love me?" It showed all of him, the boy, the fears, the wonder, the human behind the god-mask. And then the image shifted again. Now, the mirror showed moments from his rule, not grand ceremonies or feasts, but small kindnesses, helping a servant up who had tripped, listening to a child's story, when others walked past, leaving an offering at a shrine, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. The mirror showed love, not in words, not in statues, but in action. Tutankhamun's throat grew tight, not from sadness, but from the strange, quiet feeling of being truly seen, not by gods, not by people. Of the mirror, it was cool, smooth, still. His reflection returned, not a child, not a god, just him, just Tutankhamun. And that was enough. He smiled, a quiet smile, meant only for the moon and the mirror. Then he bowed his head, whispered, "Thank you, grandmother," and turned to go outside. The moon waited for him. It followed his steps across the stone like a loyal friend. He paused one last time before his chambers, looked up, and murmured, "I know who I am now, and that is all I ever needed." Our journeys that are meant to be taken with fanfare, trumpets, dancers, long lines of servants in bright linen. And then there are the quiet ones, the kind where the night wraps you in shadow, the stars walk beside you, and the river knows your name without asking. This was that kind of journey. The golden boat waited at the edge of the river, anchored in still water beneath the palm trees. It wasn't large or showy, just a narrow, shining vessel with a single curved sail and seats shaped like lotus leaves. Tutankhamun had it built not for parades, but for peace, a place to glide, to think, to listen. He stepped aboard with no guards, no fanfare, just himself. And the oarsman, an old man with quiet eyes and hands as steady as the Nile itself. They pushed off. The boat slipped through the water like a whisper, barely making a sound. Above them, the stars blinked softly, scattered jewels on dark velvet. The moon was a silver sickle, watching. Tutankhamun leaned back and exhaled. The weight of the palace, the ceremonies, the names, they all drifted away. Behind him, the river was alive in its own slow way. Cattails rustled gently along the banks. Frogs croaked in the distance, and sometimes the splash of a heron echoed like laughter from a dream. But mostly there was silence, not the empty kind, the full kind, the kind that holds space for everything you are. Tutankhamun looked down at the water. It reflected the sky so perfectly that for a moment he couldn't tell which way was up. Were they sailing across the river, or through the stars? He smiled. Perhaps both. The old oarsman said nothing. He did not need to. His presence was like the boat itself, steady, quiet, true. Sometimes the truest guides are the ones who speak not in words, but in the way they row. As they reached the midpoint of the river, Tutankhamun took a small object from his robe, a tiny golden fish, carved when he was a child. He used to keep it under his pillow when sleep wouldn't come. He held it one last time, then he kissed it gently and let it fall. The fish sank silently, down into the water, into memory, into forever. He whispered, "Thank you for swimming beside me all these years." The boat turned gently, drifting toward the opposite bank. The moonlight shimmered like silk on the surface. Tutankhamun leaned into the cushions, his eyes growing heavier, his heart growing lighter. He thought of his parents, of Ankhesenamun, of his people, of the desert, the mirror, the scarab, the garden dot, and most of all, he thought of peace, the kind that lingers, even after the boat has gone. As they neared the far shore, a breeze picked up, soft, warm, filled with jasmine and old lullabies. He let his eyes close, not in sadness, but in trust, the kind of trust that knows, wherever the river leads, you are already home. That night, Tutankhamun dreamed, but it was no ordinary dream. It felt deep, not like sleeping, more like arriving. He found himself standing in a great, endless hall. The ceiling was made of stars. The floor shimmered like moonlit water, and all around him were pillars carved with every story he had ever known, ever lived, ever imagined. This was not a place in the waking world. This was the hall of two truths in the stories of the ancients. This was the place where souls came to have their hearts weighed against the feather of Ma. At Ma, the goddess of truth and balance, kept the feather always pure, never heavy, never stained. It was the measure of a life, and now it was his turn. But Tutankhamun was not afraid. He looked down at his chest and saw a soft golden glow where his heart beat. It rose gently from his body, shaped like a small orb of light, floating before him like a flame that had learned to dance. In front of him stood a scale. On one side, the feather of Mat, white and fine and shining with calm. On the other, his heart. The two rested side by side, waiting. A silence fell, so complete that it felt like music. No judgment, no punishment, just truth. And then something beautiful happened. The scales did not tip. They stood still, perfectly balanced. His heart was light, not because he had never made mistakes, not because he had lived without sorrow, but because he had loved, he had learned, he had tried even when it was hard. From the shadows, a soft breeze stirred, and Mat herself stepped into view. She did not look stern, she looked kind. Her eyes held galaxies. Her voice sounded like wind through reeds. She said, "You have remembered yourself, and in doing so, you remembered the world. You walked with gentleness and ruled with care. You were not perfect, you were real, and that is more than enough." Tutankhamun bowed, His eyes filled not with tears, but with light. He felt no fear, only ease. He had carried the crown. He had carried pain. He had carried joy. And now he could rest. Matt reached forward and placed the feather gently in his palm. It did not weigh him down. It lifted him, not away, but into something greater, into the hush between stars, the space between names, the truth behind all truths. He smiled, the kind of smile only souls make when they are finally free. And then, like a single petal on the wind, Tutankhamun drifted from the hall weightless, whole and home. Asterisk, there is a place beyond time, beyond sunrises and sunsets, beyond crowns and scrolls, beyond sorrow and celebration. It is not made of gold, though it glows. It is not ruled, though it is full of peace. Some call it the field of reeds, others call it the land of forever. But Tutankhamun knew it now as the quiet kingdom. He arrived gently, not in a chariot, not in a procession, but like a leaf on the wind, softly touching down. He opened his eyes and found himself standing in a vast field where the reeds whispered secrets to the breeze and the air shimmered like early morning dew. Birds sang, but only just enough to stir the heart, and the water flowed, not fast, not loud, just enough to remind you you were never far from home. He walked barefoot. The earth beneath him was cool and kind. Each step felt like a memory, but not one that hurt. These were the memories that healed. The laughter of children in palace gardens, the warm touch of Ankhesenamun's hand, the smell of incense at dawn, the rhythm of oars on river water here. Every echo was gentle. There were others, two dot faces from his past, but softer now, lighter. They smiled, not with words, but with knowing. Some bowed. Some embraced him. Some simply placed a hand on his shoulder and said, with their silence, "We remember you." He came upon a tree, tall and wide, with golden leaves that chimed in the wind like temple bells. Beneath it sat a throne, not grand, but carved from smooth stone, worn from centuries of love. He did not sit on it to rule. He sat to rest, to feel, to breathe, to be. And as he did, the sky shifted from dusk to dawn and back again. Time passed like water through fingers, but he was never in a hurry. Here, nothing rushed. From time to time, the breeze would bring news from the world he left behind. A child whispering his name in a history lesson. A new king lighting a candle at his tomb. A scholar wondering if he had truly been kind. And each time, Tutankhamun would smile, not because he needed to be remembered, but because love, once given, never disappears. One day, as he sat beneath the tree, a small boy approached him, curly hair, bright eyes, dust on his knees. He looked familiar. Tutankhamun tilted his head and asked gently, "Who are you?" The boy grinned. "I'm you, when you still believed all stories were true." The king laughed, not loudly, but with deep joy. "Then come, sit with me," he said, "and tell me everything." And so they sat, the king and the child, the memory and the dream, under a sky that shimmered like forever. And they spoke of gardens, and scarabs, and golden boats, and love. And the reeds whispered all around them, echoing their quiet song. Once there was a boy who became a king, who became a light, who never truly left. Asterisk, the sun was just beginning to set, casting honeyed light over the cliffs of the Valley of the Kings. Shadows stretched long, like stories waiting to be told. A lone traveler moved among the rocks, boots soft against the dust, eyes scanning the landscape as if it might speak to him. He was young, no older than 16. His name was Ahmes, and though he did not know it yet, he was about to find something the world had forgotten. He wasn't a prince, or a priest, or a great scholar. He was the son of a gardener, quiet, curious, always listening to wind and stone. But he carried a map drawn not with ink, but with dreams. Each night for weeks he had dreamt the same thing: a golden boat, a laughing boy with dark eyes, and a whisper in the reeds, "Come find me where the blossoms do not die." And so, here he was, following echoes, chasing warmth through stone. Near a bend in the valley, Ahmes paused. There beneath a ledge, half buried by sand and silence, lay something strange. Not a grand entrance, not a doorway carved with pharaohs and gods, just a simple archway, covered in vines that had no business growing in the desert. Lotus blossoms, fresh blooming, in the sand. His breath caught. He reached out, parted the vines, and stepped through. What he found was not cold, not dark. It was not a tomb at all, not the way others imagined. It was more like a garden, hidden in stone. The chamber inside was small, but filled with color. Murals danced on the walls, not stiff paintings of gods and battles, but gentle scenes. A boy feeding birds, a young king smiling beside a girl with laughing eyes, a golden boat sailing under a starry sky, and everywhere blossoms, painted, carved, and somehow real. Their fragrance filled the air: lotus, myrrh, date flowers, sweet papyrus, the scent of memory, the scent of peace. In the center of the chamber there was a stone altar, no coffin, no treasures, just a single object, a mirror, old and polished, its surface still. Ahmes stepped closer, drawn as if by music. He looked in, and the mirror did not show his own face. It showed a boy, not a king, not a statue, just a boy, smiling gently. Tutankhamun. And then the boy in the mirror spoke, not with lips, but with warmth. "Thank you for remembering. The story never ends. It only blossoms in new hearts." Ahmes smiled, not in shock, not in fear, as if he had always known he was part of this story. He sat down beside the mirror, listened to the silence, felt the warmth of a blossom against his palm, and whispered, I'll tell them all." And outside, the last light of the sun touched the entrance, turning vines to gold and stone to dream. Ahmes did not run. He did not shout. He simply stepped out of the hidden chamber, the scent of blossoms still clinging to his tunic, the mirror's image still warm in his memory. The sun had dipped low, and the stars were beginning to wake. He looked back once at the curtain of vines behind him, now glowing softly in the twilight. "Good night," he whispered. "Thank you." And then he began the walk home. He didn't need to write anything down. The images, the boy in the mirror, the dancing murals, the weightless feeling of truth were etched into his bones. It was not history he had found, but something deeper, something like a heartbeat. When he reached his village, no one believed him at first, not the elders, not the scribes, not even his brothers. They nodded politely, smiled as if humoring a child, and returned to their scrolls. But Ahmes didn't mind. He simply planted a seed, a real one, right at the edge of the village square. No one noticed at first, But over the weeks, a single lotus flower bloomed where no flower ever had. It opened each morning with the sun, and closed each night under the stars. People began to whisper, and when the children asked Ames where it came from, he would sit beneath the date tree and tell the story. Once there was a boy who became a king, he would begin. But more than that, he was someone who listened to wind, to water, to hearts. He ruled with gentleness, and when his time ended, he did not disappear, he became a story. And if you listen just right, you might still hear his laughter on the river. The children would fall asleep in his arms, dreaming of golden boats and secret gardens and Ames. He would sit a little longer, watching the stars rise over the desert cliffs. Sometimes he swore he could hear music in the reeds, or the rustle of a robe, or feel a warm hand on his shoulder when no one else was there. And always the blossom grew, even in sand, even in silence. Years passed, the story spread from village to village, from mother to child, from dream to dream. Not all believed, but many felt, and those who felt carried the tale forward, not in scrolls, but in softness, in kindness, in listening, in planting where no one thought things could grow. Ames grew older, but never stopped sitting by the flower. And one night, under a sky so full of stars, it looked like a field of candles, he closed his eyes for the last time in the morning. A second lotus had bloomed beside the first, and when the villagers leaned in close, they swore they could hear the faintest echo of laughter, young, warm, and full of light. Above the desert, beyond the cliffs of Thebes, past the reach of temples and tombs, the stars gathered. One by one, they lit up the sky, as if someone were slowly lighting lamps along the corridors of the heavens. And among them, sailing gently through the dark, was a single golden light, quiet, warm, moving like a boat through soft black water. This was not a star by birth. It was a memory, a promise, a soul that had not faded. It was Tutankhamun. He did not wear a crown anymore. He did not need one dot up here, in the vast hush of forever. He was not king or boy or legend. He was simply himself, and that was more than enough. He drifted across the sky on a boat of starlight, its sail made of dreams, its hull carved from every tender moment he had ever known. He passed over sleeping villages, where children still whispered his name into the folds of night. He passed over gardens blooming in sand, over scrolls left half-finished beside oil lamps, over boys with curious eyes and girls with laughter like music. And wherever he passed, a faint glow lingered behind, like the soft scent of blossoms long after the petals fall. The gods did not summon him. They simply nodded as he passed, acknowledging a soul that had walked with humility. Anubis, the guardian of the threshold, offered a silent bow. Isis smiled. Thoth dipped his quill in recognition, and Mat, ever still, ever watching, tilted her head, the feather on her crown as light as his heart, at the edge of the sky. Where silence meets eternity, Tutankhamun looked down once more. He saw his tomb, quiet and still beneath the sand. He saw Ames' lotus, now surrounded by a circle of flowers that had bloomed from the kindness of stories shared. He saw every heart that had paused to wonder not what treasure he had, but what joy he gave, and he smiled. He lay back on his boat, hands behind his head, eyes on the galaxies unfolding above him, no longer searching, no longer waiting, just resting. and the stars whispered their lullaby. Sleep, little king. The world remembers you, not because you were great, but because you were good. Sleep, child of the Nile. The river of time carries your name, not in shouts, but in songs. Sleep, golden boy. You are home. And so ends the tale of the boy who became a king, the king who became a story, the story that became a light in the sky. He sleeps still, not buried, but held, not forgotten, but woven into every dream told, beneath stars and beside blossoms. And when the night is quiet, and the wind is gentle, and a child listens close, you might hear him laugh, just once, just enough, and then sleep.